Sorry, boy, but his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Good morning from the Batcave. It is Tuesday. It is July 2nd, 2024, and I'm going to talk to you guys for a bit about Canaan and Zoroastrianism. Based on my research so far, this seems to be the OG false religion. I believe Canaan is this is the guy. If you look in the genealogy of Luke chapter 3 and you compare it to the genealogies in Genesis and Chronicles, you'll see that there's a different genealogy between Noah and Abraham. Okay, this guy Canaan comes from the book of Zoroaster, or the book of Jubilees, which I'm discovering that I believe the book of Jubilees was a derivative work, and the book of Jubilees, the book of Enoch, they basically are a mixture of Zoroastrian and Jewish ideas. So they seem to come out of myths and legends and mixing, and some of it seems to be genuine scholarship, similar to what I'm doing right now, where the Jews are trying to reconcile their records with the Persian records. But you want to remember, the Persian Empire ruled for about 300 years. They were only in Babylonian captivity for really from the time Jerusalem was destroyed till the time they were allowed to go start rebuilding the temple. That whole period was only I think it was like 20, little over 20 years. It wasn't a long time, because you have I'm sorry, no, it was longer than that. It was probably like 40 years, but you have people taken away, and then you have the city destroyed, and then you have the people you have the temple destroyed in 1586, and then you have them allowed to return it in 1539. So you're looking about like a space of less than 50 years that they're actually in Babylon. However, most of them do not return to land, and most of them remain in the Persian Empire, and the Persian Empire is going to continue till you have 539, and I think Alexander comes somewhere around, I believe it's like 325, and he takes it over. So you've got a good 200 plus years of Persian influence, okay? And in the East, you got to remember, the Greeks are going to take over, and Greek speaking is going to be the dominant language, especially around the Mediterranean region for the next several hundred years after that. However, if you get just east of Jerusalem, you got to remember the Romans never really took that over, and even though the Greek language was popular in the Mediterranean culture, the Aramaic language, which would have been the bridge between Palestine and the Persian Empire, remained the main language really for many centuries afterwards. I mean, the Aramaic language is still spoken today, but it really was the dominant language in the Middle East until the Muslim conquest in the 7th century. So you're looking at like 1,000 years of Aramaic being the main language in the Middle East. And so a lot of this mixing happened when everybody was speaking Aramaic, because what you have is you're going to have Persians, you're going to have Babylonians, you're going to have Assyrians, you're going to have Jews, you're going to have what would today be considered Arabs, you're going to have Chaldeans. All these different people are all speaking Aramaic, and they're comparing the records, and they're mixing their ideas. And it looks like what comes out of that is a very common book that a lot of people had in the East, which was called the Book of the Giants. And the Book of the Giants seems to be a mythological record about the giants that existed after the flood. And what people are doing is they're mixing legends of guys like Gilgamesh, who I believe was Nimrod, Og, king of Bashan, and he's mentioned in it, and then just a bunch of different legends about the giants, which are mostly, these giants that exist in Canaan. But these legends are going to carry on, and eventually, in this period, they seem to be equated with the Nephilim before the flood. And so you end up with these myths of these pre-flood giants, which it seems like the Jews are creating. We would have no record of what happened with the giants before the flood unless Noah passed that down, and there's no evidence that he did. Everything about pre-flood giants seems to come from Jewish myths that appear probably around the 3rd century BC, which is around the time that the Persian Empire is falling to Alexander's empire. So it just seems to be them mixing with these Zoroastrian legends, which seem to be the Book of the Giants. And the Book of the Giants, we just have fragments of it, and we know that like Manny was considered himself like the next Zoroaster. He seemed to have been mixing and merging and adding to that. And so we know this Book of the Giants has spread as far as the Uyghurs of China. Okay, so it's in like a dozen different languages, all from like Persia, spread throughout the East and into the Middle East. So we know this book went far, but we just have fragments of it. But what we do know is that there's things that seem to be from that in the Book of Enoch. And so what the Jews seem to have done is taken these myths and legends and said, yeah, that's basically what we got from Enoch from before the flood. And they're mixing things that are really about Canaan and Zoroaster, and they're applying them to Enoch. Okay? Enoch is who the Persians believed is God's first prophet, which is why the Jews are going to try to, align this with Enoch. And you find the Jews doing this in Egypt. You find that with the Septuagint, they're trying to align their history by adding to the genealogies with Egyptian history. What the Jews are trying to do is make themselves and their religion credible by aligning it with the world's history around them. And you find early Christians doing this too. You're going to find chronographies that are doing this, all the way up to Bishop Ussher, who Bishop Ussher is like a 17th century English guy. And you're going to find like Clement of Alexander doing this, Tatian the Assyrian doing this, Theophilus of Alexander doing this, this guy named, I think it's Paulus Orosius, who's like a student of Augustine. He does this. It's just a very common thing. Julius Africanus, I think, does this to try to take the Bible and align it with pagan histories. The problem is they're always giving pagan histories too much credibility. They're never assuming that these pagan histories are just making up and fudging their records to prop up certain kings and dynasties and make them look like they're much older than they were. Well, that was actually a really common thing. I mean, we find this even in the Achaemenid dynasty, which is the Persians doing this. Okay, they're going to the reason this guy Darius the Mede in the book of Daniel is not accounted, he's actually well attested to, is because the Persians tried to make their dynasty start earlier to make it look like they were ruling over the entire empire when the Medes defeated Babylon. See, that's very important for them to say that we were in charge when they defeated Babylon, because the whole Babylonian Empire follows after Persia. They don't just reconquer everything that Nebuchadnezzar conquered. They conquered Babylon, and that all became under their dominion. And what you have is you just have like a 2-year gap. You have the guy, I think his official name is like Zyxastes. His official name, his father's name is Ahasuerus, because this is Darius the Mede, the son of Ahasuerus, and his name is Cyaxares, and Astyages is his dad. Well, you just have like a 2-year period where this guy's the king, and then when he dies, Cyrus is the king. And Cyrus is part Mede, part Persian, and you're going to read this prophesied in Daniel about how it's going to be this lopsided empire where the younger end up becoming the greater, okay? Well, what they do is they just fudge the dates of the start of Cyrus's rule to make it look like he was ruling when they took over Babylon. That way they don't have authority issues of them being under Babylon when basically they absorbed the Median Empire. Well, it really was Darius the Mede who conquered Babylon, and then he's officially going to be the king, and the Medes are going to have this in their records, but they've just discovered these records recently to prove this. Well, they had it in ancient history because they had Xenophon, who's a Greek historian, is going to testify to this. he's going to testify to this Cyaxares and Astyages ruling, and then later historians are going to come in, and you're just going to have this anti-Daniel bias in history because Daniel predicts the things that happen so accurately. They believe it was written after the fact, and they think they just made up this Darius the Mede in order to make it work with the Jewish stories. And even though you have an outside source, Xenophon, testifying to this Cyaxares, who they say is Darius, they're just going to say, yeah, that guy was a myth. He didn't exist. And they're going to say this up until the modern era, but now they're coming up with multiple archaeological records to find out, well, that was the case. Well, it's always the case. The biblical history is always accurate, and if you give it enough time, the archaeology is going to prove it in spades, okay? Now, so you have this Median Empire, and I want you to understand how old this empire is, okay? Remember, the Medes, according to the Book of Jubilees, and I believe there's some truth in the Book of Jubilees because I believe they're getting this stuff from Persian and Median records, from the Magi, because Daniel's over the Magi, okay? And so I believe some of this reconciling of the Magi's record and the biblical record probably starts with Daniel, because you're talking about a period of like 50 years at least where Daniel's over the Magi, okay? And the Magi are actually, they're not just a priesthood, they're like a Levitical priesthood where they're a tribe of people of the Medes who serve as the priesthood for Zoroastrianism, and they trace their roots back to 1736 BC. Okay, now I want you to understand how old this is, and this is coming from because now the Kurds in Iraq have a legalized religion, and so because they have a legalized religion, some of the Kurds are Christians, some of the Kurds are Muslims, most of them are Muslims, but because they have a recently passed a law where they have legalized religion there, the Zoroastrians are coming out of hiding, okay? Now, the Zoroastrians have been here the whole time. They've just been an extreme minority living in the deserts and, in the country because they're persecuted by the Muslims, okay? Well, now they're not persecuted anymore in Iraq, and they're coming out, and they're saying, yeah, we've been here since 1736 AD, okay? Or 1736 BC. That's really important because the date that I get, remember, my theory is that Zoroastrianism was the first written account of the original Babylonian religion after the Tower of Babel. Remember, they're all using cuneiform before that, and they all seem to be speaking Sumerian. That seems to be the original language before the Tower of Babel. And once the Tower of Babel hits, they all have their different languages, and so stuff starts to emerge in different scripts and alphabets and stuff like that. Well, the language that Zoroastrian comes from is called Old Avestan. The leading scholar on this language and on Zoroastrianism says it comes from the 1700s. Meanwhile, the Zoroastrian religious community out of Kurdistan is saying, or 1700s BC, they're saying their religion traces back to 1736, okay? Now, this is really important. No, I'm sorry, 1738, okay, BC. This is the year I get for when Joseph's famine starts, is 1735 BC. So we're talking about a 3-year gap between when the Zoroastrians, the religious Zoroastrians are claiming their religion starts, and when I calculate the Tower of Babel, okay? Because I think the Tower of Babel probably happens. Remember, Joseph's famine starts in 1735 BC, based on my record. And again, between me and Usher, there's like a 4-year gap, okay? So if Usher's right, that would put it starting the year before. That would be 1739, okay? So it's just 1 year apart, okay? Now, my guess is there's probably some error in my calculation. I've caught a little bit of error in Usher's calculation, but it seems to be it's a gradual 4-year difference between his calculation and my calculation. So it seems very close. You just see like a year creep in here, and he's literally lining up with these records to months and days, okay? So maybe he's more accurate, maybe, mine's a much more simple calculation, but the point is, if his calculation is correct, Joseph's famine starts the year before they claim Zoroastrianism starts, okay? Now, why is nobody connecting this? And this is why. Because the myth that the Tower of Babel began in the days of Peleg starts with Jubilees. And Josephus has it too. This is a very old Jewish myth, and that's because it says in the Bible that in his years, or in his days, the earth was divided. Okay, well, we know this from the Book of Jubilees and probably other sources as well, that the dividing of the earth, this is not the dividing of the languages after their tongues. See, you have in Genesis 10, you have them accounting, here's the generations of the sons of Noah, and then it's going to say, by these were the isles of the Gentiles, or this is going to be the coasts or the regions, the borders of the Gentiles, divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after his families, into their nations. Okay, so notice it's the Gentiles being divided, not the earth. Okay, so there's two divisions of the earth. The first one is Noah, and this is something that I believe happens at Göbekli Tepe, or it's Göbekli Tepe. I'm going to keep saying it wrong, so somebody's going to get on and be a smart butt and say, you said that wrong, so don't listen to anything you say. Okay, now listen, it's I say Göbekli Tepe. It's Göbekli Tepe. Okay, Göbekli Tepe seems to be where they all lived. Remember, if you traced, here's the Euphrates River. The region of Ararat is right here. Here's where this is, and it says they came from the east, so they're going to follow the Euphrates River east, and they're going to go downhill. Where Göbekli Tepe is right where you're going to hit the plain of Shinar. Okay, so what it seems like, it's also 20 miles north of Haran, which is where Haran is going to be a major center where the Japhethites and the Shemites and the Cushites from Nimrod's empire all seem to mix, okay? And then the Hittites too, okay? This region right here, which is where Abraham's dad goes after his son dies, I believe he was going to try to raise up a campaign against Nimrod, and he failed to do so, okay? Anyways, this is going to be exactly where it flattens out and becomes a plain from the mountains, and that's where the plain of Shinar begins, okay? It's also between the rivers, and the land, Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers. So the land between the rivers would start up here where it becomes a plain and go all the way down to here. So this would be considered lower Mesopotamia. This would be considered upper Mesopotamia, okay? And they seem to disperse from there. So the Japhethites are going to spread north from there. The Hamites are going to go down into Africa, with the exception of Canaan. He's not going to go all the way down to Africa. He's going to see basically the promised land. He's going to be like, I like this. I'm going to stay here. Okay? And so that's why Canaan gets cursed. And again, this is in the Book of Jubilees. So the Book of Jubilees seems to be holding two different theories and mixing them together. Okay? Canaan doesn't just get cursed because of Ham's sin. Canaan gets cursed. Remember, they say what Ham does, and what the reason in Genesis they're saying what Ham does is because the covering that Shem takes the lead in is why Shem is blessed with a priesthood. Remember, the whole point of the priesthood is to be like a go-between, like an intercessor between you and God. So who do you want to be the intercessor? Well, obviously the one who covers your shame, covers your sin, right? So Noah sees Shem getting that, and that's the reason that's recorded. The curse that he puts on Canaan is going to be at his deathbed. So those two things are going to happen years apart, but it's going to be like, centuries apart. Centuries apart. You're going to talk about like 300 years between those things happening. However, it's going to be like when you see Jacob giving all the blessings and the cursings of his sons when he dies, right? Reuben does something in his youth that then Jacob is going to curse, really, his family to, and same thing with Simeon and Levi. He's going to curse them to be dispersed within the tribes and not get their own land because of what they did in their youth, okay? Well, likewise, Noah is going to curse Canaan for what he would have done probably 150 years before, and he's going to bless Shem for what he did probably like 200 to 300 years before, okay? And it's going to happen at Noah's deathbed that he does all this, okay? So Noah, by this time, he's going to be buried up here. Japheth is going to be buried right here. Here's Göbekli Tepe. Ham is going to end up buried up here in Pakistan. And Shem and Heber, who are going to be the longest living ones in the Middle East, at least from the flood, they're going to be up here just south of the Golan Heights, okay? Canaan's going to stay here, and he's going to get cursed for coming into the land that's not his. Now, in the time that they disperse, initially, all the rest of the Hamites go down into Africa, and you're going to have Put, you're going to have later on in the Egyptian history, like 500 years later, the Egyptians called them Punt, P-U-N-T. But Put is going to start out right here. Cush is going to start out right here. And Mizraim is going to start out right here, okay? So them and their descendants, okay? This is all before the Tower of Babel. And then Punt is going to migrate in, and then they're going to become the Libyans and North Africans. They're also going to become the Pygmies and all these different people in the center of Africa. And it's just the desertification that is basically just pushing everybody inward, because the deserts keep taking over the land, and so they're going to keep migrating south, where you have more wetlands and you have more fertile soils for farming and all that other stuff, okay? So that's where they start out. And then the Cushites are going to keep traveling and migrating and colonizing. And remember, they're supposed to be in Africa. This division of land basically gives Japheth the majority, and so they give him Eurasia, and then it gives Shem the middle. And by most accounts, India was given to Shem. Okay? Now, there is a little bit that's kind of skewed, because it seems like the Jews are trying to say that Europe was given to Shem too. And I don't know if that's the case. The only Shemites we have even migrating to Europe, it seems to be, is the Danites. Okay? So the Lydians are going to be up here, which is Lud. Those are Shemites. But they seem to be the furthest west of the Shemites. The Elamites seem to be the furthest east. But their claim is that India and this whole Persian region was given to the Shemites. I don't know, but what we know is the north was given to Japheth, the south, which was Africa, was given to Cush, and then the place in the middle, which would be the Middle East, is given to Shem. Okay, and the reason is because Shem is going to be right here at the closest distance. See, there's Gobekli Tepe. Here's where your Japhethites are, and here's where your Hamites are supposed to be. And right in the middle in Jerusalem is going to be the priesthood that intercedes, okay? And this is not going to get ultimately fulfilled until Christ in the millennium, when he rules from here, and he's going to say, Assyria, my people, so that's going to be representing the north, and Egypt, my people, and that's going to be representing the south. And he's going to be right in the middle in Jerusalem, ruling and reigning and interceding for them, okay? That's how Noah ordained it. Now, it doesn't happen in Shem's day, and I do believe Shem is Melchizedek, because it seems like they get pushed out. They get pushed out of the land, or out of Jerusalem, and then they end up going here, and then Jebusites, which are a Canaanite tribe, take over Salem, because it used to be called Salem, and now that by the time they get there in Joshua's day, it's called Jebus, okay? And then it gets taken over by David, and it gets turned into Jerusalem again, okay? So the Cushites are going to travel down here, and they're going to spread first up into here, lower Mesopotamia. And see, this Kish is named after Cush, okay? So they're going to get right down to south. Remember, the Semites are migrating down the river gradually. They are aggressively expanding and colonizing, okay? And so they get this let's see, this nexus here. Oops. If you can see, this is kind of faded. This nexus right here is going to be where Babylon is, where these rivers are close to meeting. And just south of that, you're going to have Kish, okay? And Nimrod's empire is basically going to be, it's going to start out consolidating everything to the south of that. Now, Nimrod is Sargon of Akkadian. Sargon of Akkadian is well known not to have a noble birth. He's the cupbearer to the king of Kish, okay? Well, I believe the king of Kish would have probably been either Cush himself or a legitimate heir of Cush. And Nimrod, because Nimrod was basically, I think, a bastard child of Cush in his old age with a servant, so somebody who wouldn't have been his wife, so that person would have not been an heir. You have this over and over and over again in the Bible, where somebody has a kid with a concubine later, and the sons that are born of the mother don't like that kid, okay? Because he's the son of somebody that dad slept with him when he was old and he was powerful, and mom didn't like that, and we're kind of pissed at what he did to mom, and so this kid is somebody who's persona non grata, okay? Well, that seems to be who Nimrod / Sargon is, and then what you have is basically after Noah dies, you're going to have people start to consolidate and try to take over territories and claim dominion outside of their local city-state, okay? And as soon as somebody tries to do this, it seems like it's this king of Lagash, which is going to be somewhere in right around here too. Nimrod's going to start taking over. And he's going to start taking over in a big way. And what seems to happen is that Canaan, who is this guy who is known for finding the pre-flood records of astronomy, comes up with the astrological religion. And part of it is you're going to have this guy with a bow, that's Orion, who has this bow that's pointing at Taurus, which is this bull, okay? And Canaan seems to interpret that as this hunter who is destined to defeat this bull god, okay? Well, this bull god is the bull of heaven. It's literally just, if you go on Wikipedia and you read it, and it's graphic, so I'm not going to read it here, it's basically a story of who becomes Tammuz. They're called Inanna and Dumuzid to the Sumerians, but it becomes Ishtar and Tammuz. Tammuz is the bull god. He's the bull of heaven. And it's literally like her basically saying, I am a fertile field. Come plow me and put your seed in me. Okay? So it's literally Ashtra basically inviting this angel to sleep with her. And that's where the Nephilim come from. And that's why the capital of Og, king of Bashan, where he stayed, was called Ashtra. Okay? Because Og would have been the final heir of those tribes that came from Ishtar or Inanna. Okay? Well, if you read the story of Nimrod in Genesis 13, he goes and kills all these tribes of giants. Okay? Well, this is going to look like the fulfillment of this astrological prophecy of this guy who is destined to go defeat the bull god. Okay? And what you end up having is Nimrod's empire. The guy with the bow is Orion, which is, I believe, Nimrod. The bull that Orion is aiming his bow at in the stars is Taurus. Well, what you end up having is Nimrod's empire comes and takes over all of Mesopotamia up to here, and you see this river here in Turkey. The mountains right behind it, that's the extent. That's he doesn't get past that, okay? And then those mountains end up become called the Taurus Mountains. Well, why? Because you have Taurus the bull versus this bull god, okay? And then over time, after the confusion in languages happens, they start to mix and merge things, and all of a sudden the bull god becomes Zeus, because they're mixing him with the god of the storm from Job's story to become Zeus. And then Orion the hunter becomes Apollos, who is Zeus's son, who's a half god. So all they're doing is they're just transliterating and mixing and confusing the stories to basically say Nimrod and this bull of heaven, who were conflicting with each other, because Ashtra tries to seduce Nimrod, and he's like, no, or Gilgamesh is in the story, and he's like, no, I don't want what happened to your last husband. He's in Hades. And that's what happens to angels who die, okay? Or angels who get caught mating with women. They get bound up in chains of eternal darkness in Tartarus, which is in Hades, okay? So none of this is good. And Nimrod's saying, I don't want none of that. And so you have this love-hate relationship. So you have a kind of antichrist and a harlot back then. And Canaan is going to be the false prophet, okay? Now, Canaan is, according to the Book of Jubilees, and the Book of Jubilees has to be wrong here. Either the Book of Jubilees is wrong or Genesis is wrong. You can't have it both ways. You have him being the son of Arphaxad, who was born about 35 years after the flood. The Book of Jubilees is going to get the flood way wrong. The flood is off by 300 years. Okay? They're trying to align their records with, I think, Egyptian records. I'm not sure. But they change when the flood is. Okay? And you have the Septuagint, the Masoretic text, and the Book of Jubilees don't remotely match. You can see where they exactly match, and then they all get off track, okay? But you have the Book of Jubilees having, like, Methuselah die. Like, if you just take the records of how old he was, you have him die like 200 years after the flood. It doesn't work. It's just a mess, okay? And that could be because it's just translated wrong, because the only copy we have is from the Ge'ez language from the Ethiopians. So the Ethiopians apparently kept a copy of it in their Bible, but it's wrong, okay? So the Book of Jubilees is going to say that Canaan is the son of Arphaxad, who is the father of Selah, okay? Well, if that's true, then you have to wedge somehow 35 years into the genealogy of Genesis, and the genealogy of Genesis is all wrong, okay? You can't make this work any way you spin it. Canaan is probably, if this is a real guy, and he seems to be a real guy, he is probably the brother of Selah. They probably were born, within a year or two of each other. And he just gets wedged into the genealogy by the author of the Book of Jubilees, and he just makes up that he's his father, okay? And then that genealogy seems to get into the Gospel of Luke, okay? Again, if the Jubilees genealogy is correct, and if he's truly that parent in the Gospel of Luke, then the Genesis genealogy is wrong, because it doesn't just account who's in the line; it counts how many years there are between them. And if one of those two things has to be false, they can't logically both be true, unless Canaan is having his kid when he's like 15 years old, and then his son has a kid when he's 15 years old, so you can make them both fit within 35 years. People didn't have kids when they were teenagers back then, okay? People weren't considered adults until they were like 30 back then, okay? Those are the youngest people who the youngest person in this era who has a kid is 29, okay? So again, I don't consider this an error in Luke. I consider Luke is probably getting a genealogy that is based on temple records. This is going to be around the time that Paul is in prison in Caesarea, and Luke is either getting a genealogy that's based on the Book of Jubilees, but it doesn't seem to be based on the Book of Jubilees, or temple records that were influenced by the Book of Jubilees, okay? And whatever he gets, he is faithfully copying down the record that they have, but the record that they have could have been altered because of the Book of Jubilees. And we know the Jews would do stuff like this. Okay, that's why Matthew's record has 2 names missing in the genealogy, okay? We also have, we know like the Jews changed the descendant of Moses in the book of Judges to Manasseh because they don't want to profane the name of Moses, okay? Perhaps the Jews took Canaan out of the Genesis genealogy because he was considered profane for starting these astrological pagan idolatrous religions. Maybe, we don't know, but the point is you can't reconcile the record in Luke with the record in Jubilees, with the record in Genesis. You cannot possibly reconcile them. So you have to assume one of the 2 records in the Bible has an error in it, a factual error. That doesn't mean it's not inspired, doesn't mean it's not truthful. It just means there's a factual error in the record that was taken into the scriptural account, okay? And that's okay. So, this is the way I'm surmising this. This is theory, okay? Canaan is probably another son of Arphaxad. Arphaxad becomes the father of the Chaldeans. Arphaxad's grandson Heber becomes the father of all the Hebrew peoples, and that's going to include the Western Arabs. They're all sons of Joktan, and that's going to include Abraham and his family and all the nations that descend from him. And they're going to be, the people in Haran are going to be part Hebrew. You're going to have some of them living down here in Ur of the Chaldees. They're going to generally mix because they come from Arphaxad, who's the father of the Chaldees, and then they're going to come out, and the descendants of Peleg mostly come out through Abraham, and the descendants of Joktan mostly migrate out and become these Bedouins, okay? And then they're all going to mix and become Arabs, okay? So Canaan's going to have a different story. According to the Book of Jubilees, and I believe these records are coming from the Magi. I don't think they're coming from Jewish oral tradition, okay? According to the Book of Jubilees, Madai, who's the father of the Medes or the Kurds, is going to marry the daughter of Arphaxad. So he's going to marry Canaan's sister, okay? Canaan is then going to marry the daughter of Madai, who is, so what you're going to have is you're going to have a tribe of what become Chaldeans married into a daughter of who becomes the Medes, okay? And it just so happens that when you get to Herodotus writing his history in the Persian period, so this is going to be 1,500 years later, roughly, he is going to account that the Magi are one of, I think, 6 tribes of the Medes, okay? And the Magi seem to be also the priesthood of Canaan. Okay, so these people are going to survive in Medo-Persian records. Okay, and what they seem to be called is the Kaniam dynasty. Okay, so if you get to studying Zoroastrianism, okay? Zoroastrianism, again, they have a mythological Zoroaster that the Greeks account, which is some guy who was born like 30 years before Alexander the Great, okay? This is totally false because we know Zoroastrianism was practiced. We know the Magi were around in Daniel's age, and Daniel's around 100 years before Alexander the Great. So we know they're older than that. But we also know that when you see the magicians in Pharaoh's Egypt, and you see the Magi in the Bible, all these people are descended from these Magians or Magi, okay? The word magician or Magian is not a term for magic, for what we consider magical powers, okay? It's an actual tribal name of these guys named Magia, who were known for divination, magic tricks, and astrology, okay? And the kind of divination they did was augury, okay? I think they also did some dream interpretation, which is why you have them trying to interpret Pharaoh's dreams, trying to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dreams and failing, and Joseph and Daniel straighten them out. Okay. Anyways, they're called the Kayanian dynasty. Okay. And I did an etymological study on this using ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is basically saying the Kayan is a word that means king, and that's why. It's also going to be the same word behind Khans, okay? So the Khans of, Genghis Khan and stuff like this, this is a word for king that they used in Old Avestan, in the Turkish languages, and then the Mongolian language. They're all going to use this term Khan, okay, for king. Well, I don't think that's what the Kayanian means. I think the Kayanian dynasty literally means Canaan, okay? And here's why. According to the Zoroastrian myths and legends, okay, they're prehistory, which the secular world is going to say this is all mythology. I think it's confused history, okay? They have a dynasty called the Pishdadian dynasty, which starts with a first man who wears animal skins, who has one son that is killed by this evil god. Okay, and then that son has a son who avenges on that god, and that god becomes the beginning of the Pishdadian dynasty. Okay, the Pishdadian dynasty just means first established. Okay, and I believe that's their account corrupted by the Tower of Babel of Cain and Abel and Adam, and the Pishdadian dynasty would have been Seth on down. Okay, so it basically starts with Adam. In their world, they have two primordial deities. One is going to be this guy, Gomeyard, which is the skin-wearing man. That's Adam, who is the prototype for humanity, and they consider him a god. The other one is a bull. Okay, you're going to find this bull god everywhere. Okay, the reason is, again, what I believe this is not necessarily entirely people trying to invent a false religion. I think there's stuff like that in there. But what it primarily is probably based on an ancient record that they are saying all humans either come from Adam or this bull of heaven. Okay, so the Nephilim come from the bull of heaven, the rest of us come from Adam, and this is the ancient myth that becomes the serpent seed doctrine. Okay, and that's why you're going to have this idea of two dynasties before the flood, and one's going to be part Nephilim and one's not. Okay. That is not going to be true. There were Nephilim before the flood, and there's Nephilim afterwards. We have no evidence. We have no evidence whatsoever that anyone came through the flood that would have been descended from a Nephilim. Okay? No evidence whatsoever. Okay? What we do have evidence of is that there's a lot of scriptural evidence is that there were Nephilim after the flood, and they all come from this bull of heaven. And so what the Persians seem to be trying to say, or this is going to be the Old Avestan, so think the Medes, okay, the ancient Medes, okay. What they're saying is that that basically all humans become from this man who wore animal skins, which is Adam, or the bull of heaven, and those are their original two gods. They still have an overarching invisible god, which is Ahura Mazda, okay, but then they have these lower gods. And these guys are going to be the ones who come up with 7 archangels, what becomes 7 archangels in Enoch, in Catholicism. It's there too. This idea of 7 archangels is really just the 7 visible planets. Okay, so these are what the Bible calls wandering stars. So you're going to have 7 visible planets from Earth, which is going to be Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Okay, so those are your 7 visible planets, and what they're going to say is basically God is, they understand God to be invisible, but they understand there to be material reflections of the invisible God. So the sun is like a material reflection of the invisible God, and it becomes associated with Nimrod eventually. The moon is associated with, I think the Holy Spirit. I could be mistaken. Okay, but in a lot of cases, it's another god. And then you have these 7 wandering stars. Okay, remember, this is an astrological religion. And they see the planets as there's these 7 other spheres. This is important. They're all circles, right? This idea of 7 heavens is 7 spheres. Okay, you're going to hear philosophies that really stem from Zoroastrianism that come out in Pythagoras, and he's going to talk about the 7 spheres. Well, that's going to really play with the Jews, because the Jews love the number 7 because 7 days of creation, okay? You have 7 days of creation, you have 7 spiritual attributes of the Holy Spirit, and the original Zoroastrianism, and this could be something that was affected by the Jews later on, accounts these 7 lower gods or spirits that work with Ahura Mazda. So Ahura Mazda is not down here on the earth, not interacting in the earth, kind of like God the Father, but has these 7 spirits that are doing it, okay? And those 7 spirits become, the Jews turn them into all the archangels that aren't named besides Michael and Gabriel, okay? So Raphael and Uriel and all these fake archangels that don't exist, okay? They're just literally Jewish transliterations of what are the 7 visible planets, okay? But these 7 visible planets are spheres, and so you have these people watching the night sky, and you have these spheres because of the Earth orbiting around the sun. Yes, it's round, it's orbiting around the sun, and you're watching all the stars circulate around, but they're in a fixed pattern on each other. But there's these 7 that you see that do this little loop once a year. Okay, well, what's this little loop once a year? Well, that's just we're going around the sun, they're going around the sun. And then when we reach this point where we're going around the back of the sun, and it looks like they're doing a loop in the sky, okay? And so they would call them wandering stars. And there were these 7 spheres that were wandering stars that became the 7 archangels in the 7 heavens, okay? And you're going to find this in the book of Enoch, you're going to find it in the book of Jubilees, and I'm telling you, it came out of Zoroastrianism, okay? There's no biblical account of 7 heavens. You have 3 heavens account in the Bible. You basically have the sky, outer space, and then where the angels dwell, okay? And then outside of that, you just have eternity, okay? But this idea of 7 heavens is going to come, and all these myths about how you get from this level to this level to this level to this level, and that is going to lend to all the mystery cults of ascending in degrees, okay? Because what you're going to have in Zoroastrianism, remember, the first primordial Adam, this guy Geomard, is going to be a god. And the descendants that come from him are going to be progressively degraded because they're material and because they come from somebody who was once an incorruptible god, but these are corruptible beings, okay? And then it's going to become eventually two myths that the angels made them because God can't make anything that can corrupt, and it's just going to change and morph over time with these different religions. But what you have here when you're lining these things up, you have the Kainian dynasty. The Pishdadian dynasty lasts for 2,000 years, okay? This is really important because Noah dies right around 2000, okay? You're going to have Noah live to be, he lives to be 950 years old. Well, the flood's 1656, okay? So It starts in his 600th year. He's going to die almost like within a few years of the 2,000 years after Adam, okay? So the Pishdadian dynasty lasts for 2,000 years. Well, that's Adam to Noah, okay? So what's the dynasty that starts immediately after it? This Canaanian dynasty. Well, according to their myth, Zoroaster was the priest of this next Canaanian dynasty, and he was the prophet of God who gave everybody the true religion from God. And he had a patron who was a king named Vishtaspa, okay? And because of Pythagoras, who's a liar, because of Pythagoras basically convincing people that Zoroastrianism was a recent religion when he just found out about it recently, this idea of this Vishtaspa or Vishtaspa, people started to equate with Cyrus, okay? People were also trying to equate Zoroaster with Daniel. And then they're eventually going to make Zoroaster Enoch, and then the Egyptians are going to make him Hermes Trismegistus, okay? Hermes Trismegistus is a totally fictional character, and then the Muslims are going to call him Idris, and they're going to equate him with Nimrod. But it seems to be it seems to be that they're getting it from something in the Akkadian Empire, okay? Because remember, who the Arabs are, or who the Muslims are, they're trading with between Egypt and Chaldea for 2,000. Thousands of years before Muhammad comes around, okay? So they're getting stories and they're mixing them, and they're even counting these people as people of the book, okay? They didn't just count, Muslims today lie, okay? They did not just count Jews and Christians as people of the book. They counted people of the book of anyone who had religious scriptures, because they taught that everybody had different prophets sent to them, and Muhammad was this prophet sent to the Arabs. And so Islam was just meant to be an Arabian religion, okay? And it was meant to unify all the Arabs, which are just a mixed people anyways, but they all spoke basically the same language by Muhammad's day, okay? And it was just trying to unify them with this fake made-up religion, which was just a blend of all these other religions, while claiming Zoroastrianism is true. You had these people who lived, these Sabaeans who practiced an astrological religion. They were saying that's true. They were saying Judaism's true. They were saying Christianity is true. They have this guy who is an overlay of Hermes Trismegistus, and they are saying that's true. And Hermes Trismegistus is just a mixture of what comes from the legend of who Enoch is, the legend of who Zoroaster is, and this other guy, I think Idris, I think his name is, from Babylonia, and they mix all these things together. Well, all these people are doing is exactly what Baha'u'llah from Baha'ism did, or what Mani from Manichaeism did. You have some so-called prophet emerging who's just mixing and blending all these religions together, and they're just calling him the guy who's the OG. Well, the guy who's the OG is either Abraham or it's Canaan, okay? Canaan makes the false religion, Abraham makes the true one, okay? It's that simple. Abraham, the tradition that comes through from Abraham through Moses and these other guys, okay? It's in both cases, you have developments of a religion. One is going to be more speculative, philosophical, because it's not from God, or it's demonic, and the other one is going to have progressive revelation on it coming from God, okay? So you're going to have it, start with Abraham. Obviously it starts with Noah and Shem, but it's going to come down through Abraham. It's going to develop some through Moses. It's going to develop some through Samuel. It's going to develop some through David and Solomon. It's going to develop some through the prophets that come after them, and then it's going to reach its final form really in Ezra and Nehemiah, but they're already corrupting it by that time, okay? Including Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra and Nehemiah are making it a racist religion now, okay? Same thing's going to happen with Zoroastrianism. It starts with Canaan, and they're going to keep adding to it, and you're going to find out that both the Vedas are basically just, they seem to be copies of the Zoroastrian hymns. Not exact copies of them, but influenced by them. Like, they come like 300 years later, and it seems to be when these Proto-Persian, I'm going to call them, they're basically mixed of Medes and Turks and stuff like this. These people take over the Ganges River civilization. they're going to kick out these Kushites, and they're going to basically start forming Brahmanism in the caste system. They're going to be taking elements of Proto-Zoroastrianism and overlaying them on top of whatever the Kushites believed, and that's how they come up with Brahmanism. Okay, and then that's going to keep developing until we get modern Hinduism. Don't let anyone deceive you into thinking this is an ancient religion that's never changed. Okay, even Judaism is not an ancient religion that never changed. Okay, it has either had progressive revelation from God or progressive revelation from demons, or philosophical changes over time in its expression. Okay, remember, I believe the whole Bible is inspired by God, but the way people explain the Bible is very often influenced by men, speculation, demons, paganism, all kinds of things. Okay, so the story of this Vishtapa is he was a king who followed Zoroaster, who I believe is Canaan, and he goes to, like Muhammad goes to start a war to spread his religion. That's what this Vishtapa does. He starts expanding his kingdom to spread this new revelation. Okay, remember, he considers this guy the prophet of God. So this is his Moses, if you will. Okay, and this king is going to conquer the world to spread this religion, which I believe is Nimrod. Okay, I believe Vishtapa is Nimrod and Zoroaster is Canaan. Okay, and remember, Zoroaster. Remember how I told you you have the Semitic Canaan who merges in with the Japhethite Medes, Madai, okay? So Zoroaster seems to be, it's Zarathustra, seems to be a mixture of the Semitic word for seed and the Japhethite word for star. So it's literally star seed, or son of the stars, or son of the star, or whatever, okay? He's this prophet who does astrology, and he becomes known as the son of the star, okay? And he's kind of like a Christ figure, kind of. But there's a second political figure. This is important. This is the beast and the false prophet, okay? There's this political figure who is conquering and expanding and spreading this religion around, okay? And that's why I believe it's called the Canaanian dynasty. I believe the Canaanian dynasty is the dynasty of Canaan, okay? It's the Canaanite, the religion of Canaan being spread by Nimrod. Okay, and it just so happens in that astrological religion, he's the coming hunter who's going to deliver them from the bull of heaven, which is the person who's creating the Nephilim, which are these scary giants who are oppressing everybody. And that's why the Book of the Giants goes around, because the bigger the mythology is about this Book of the Giants and how bad these giants are and how scary they were, the bigger the deliverance is from this Vishtapa, or the mighty hunter. Now, notice this is how this guy is going to be depicted, okay? You're going to see this over and over and over again. He's holding a circle. I'm not sure exactly, but I think this is Ahura Mazda. Notice there's a bow right there. And then you have the feathers, okay? Now let's compare this to here's the god Asher. You see there's the bow, there's the circle, there's the feathers, okay? And here is, this is either depicts Zoroaster himself or Ahura Mazda. I think that's Ahura Mazda. But notice you have a circle. I'm looking for a live relief. You notice you have a circle right here. I don't know why he's holding a circle in his hand, but notice the bow right there, okay? So, I mean, this is how they depict him in their reliefs. That's not an ornament right there. So notice in these ones you don't see the bow. In the actual stone carving, you see the bow. It's just he's holding it flat versus holding it. So this seems to be their depiction of, I'm not sure, is that Ahura Mazda? Let's see, hold on. Because Ahura Mazda is not supposed to be depictable in an image. Oh, yeah, it is. So the circle is the diadem. That's supposed to be crown. That's where the halo comes from, okay? So that's supposed to be like crowning someone with light. So don't think the Christians weren't borrowing stuff from this. This is the halo, okay? So the halo is like a divine crown, right? Well, where does this come from in the Bible? Well, you're going to receive crowns, right, when you receive this immortality. Well, this is why they keep drawing people with halos over their head. It's like a divine crown, okay? And so you have this Ahura Mazda who is putting this divine crown on people, but then you have pictures of him in a relief. Remember, this is Asher, okay? And it wouldn't shock me, because remember, Asher is Assyria, but it wouldn't shock me if Ahura Mazda is based around Asher, okay? Or the actual word for the guy, okay? But this relief of him is again, the wings are supposed to represent, angels, right? We depict angels with wings, okay? But they're supposed to represent like a mixture of man and bird, and supposedly they're supposed to represent the rays of the sun. This circle is the halo. It's him presenting the divine right of rule to kings, and then there's his bow, okay? So you see this association with him and Nimrod going on, okay? And again, remember, this dynasty is supposed to start after the dynasty of Noah ends, okay? Because Noah dies. Remember, he told Shem, Ham, and Japheth to divide up the earth, and you stay in their part, and they stay in their part. And everybody who he basically he doesn't appoint a king of the world, okay? Moses wasn't king of the world. He was the father of everyone who existed, okay? He wasn't king of the world. What Zoroaster, or what Nimrod is trying to convince people with the Sumerians kings list, is that he was the inheritor of the title of king of the world, and the title of king of the world was passed down from these people who used to be 45,000 years old, descended from people who were actually immortal, and then they just gradually got to the point where they were 400 years old, which is how old he expects to be, and that's why the divine right of rule comes down to him, okay? So he's all starting this false religion based around Canaan, showing that he's depicted in the stars as the hunter who's going to save him from the bull of heaven, who's making Nephilim, okay? And that's what Nimrod, this is Amraphel in Genesis 13, goes and does. He starts oppressing the Canaanites, and he starts attacking the tribes of giants, okay? And then Naram Sin, which seems to be Sargon's grandson, is going to extend that empire all the way up to the Taurus Mountains. And that seems to be the wall where he can't get any further than that before the empire goes into decline. And that's why I believe they named them the Taurus Mountains, is because it's a contest between him and the bull, he couldn't stop the bull beyond there. And then beyond there, that's when the bull god starts becoming, this is the region where he can't conquer. That's where the bull god starts becoming their main deity. So you have Moloch, you have Zeus, you have the calf that the Egyptians worship, and all of a sudden this bull god starts becoming somebody. Well, Nimrod couldn't beat him, so this bull god must be God. Okay? And they start worshiping the bull god. Why? Because the Canaanites, the Sidonians, the Amorites and stuff are all worshiping Baal and Moloch, and these are just really Yahweh. This is a version of the god of the storm and the bull god, and then they eventually become merged together in Zeus. You have this bull god that he couldn't defeat. And so then eventually they start associating the bull god with Nephilim, but they're not being very clear on that. Because remember, these are all things that would have all been in cuneiform. We have literally hundreds of thousands of cuneiform records. They were using it in Anatolia, they were using them in Egypt, they were using them in Persia, they were using them all over the world, okay? But once the confusion of the Tower of Babel happens, you have people trying to figure out what all this stuff means, and a lot of people BSing, and people trying to form a priesthood out of all this. Well, that priesthood that claims to know the true story of what happens is the Magi. The Magi are close to it because they're descended from the guy who basically was the propaganda minister of Nimrod, okay? And he is like probably at least 200 years older than Nimrod, but he's going to live to be like 400 years old. This is my rough timeline of when this stuff happened. So you have Noah's flood right here. Canaan is going to be born within 50 years of Noah's flood, okay? He's going to die within probably 50 years of Nimrod's birth. Now, if Nimrod is Vishtashpa and Canaan is Zoroaster, that means he would have been spreading this astrological religion for possibly centuries before Nimrod comes around. Okay? And what you have in our Sumerian records is a priesthood that had existed for centuries, and you basically have a contest between the ruling powers are going to be essentially the patriarchal dynasty on the one hand, and the false priesthood that's coming from Canaan on the other hand. That's your political and priestly dominion, okay? And basically, after Canaan's death, that's when the Sumerians' king list pops up, which just seems to be Nimrod's claim to fame, okay? He doesn't seem to be the first person. He seems to be the it seems to be that somebody else tries to assert authority on, this is this king of Lagash or whatever, seems to try to assert authority over southern Mesopotamia, who was probably descended from the rightful patriarchy of Cush, and Sargon was not. Okay? And so Sargon ends up taking over his region, and basically he becomes the king of the world. Okay? The reason he's called Nimrod, or the rebel, is because he didn't inherit patriarchal authority. He took it by force. Okay? And so that's why he's the rebel. Okay? He is the rebel king. And Nimrod is going to keep expanding his empire into the 1900s BC, and that's where you've got Canaan's religion being spread. Okay? Noah is going to die. Remember, he's hundreds and hundreds of miles away from this. And he is going to die around, probably within 50 to 100 years of Nimrod's birth. Okay? Canaan seems to outlive him, because Noah is going to die like 300 years after the flood. If Canaan died a natural death, he's going to die somewhere around 400 to 450 years after the flood. Okay? So he's going to outlive Noah by perhaps 50 years, maybe even as much as 100. Okay? Nimrod is going to seemingly not die a natural death, but he's going to outlive Noah by at least 100 years too. Okay? And then his descendants, you basically have, like, I think 4 generations of Akkadians who rule, and then it falls apart. And then what you have is you have other Sumerians, and Sumerians, just so you know, they were called the Blackheads. That's what Sumerian means, is black head. Now, that could either mean they had dark hair, they wore black hats, or they were African people. And I'm going to go with the third, that the dominant culture of the Sumerians. I thought the word itself might have been related to Shem, but apparently it means the Blackheads. Okay? And what it seems to be is the fact that you have these Cushites who came down from Egypt up from here in the Persian Gulf, and the reason modern archaeology is going to mess all this up is because they're trying to make sense of pre-flood and post-flood archaeology. Okay? There's probably some fragments of stuff that survived the flood, and they're going to say, well, all this stuff is a continuum, and what they believe is once upon a time the Persian Gulf, you're going to have 2 different archaeological records. Okay? One is that once upon a time the Persian Gulf came all the way up to here. That's why you're going to see maps where the Persian Gulf comes all the way up to here. And the other one is that it was much lower. Okay? Well, it probably was much lower before the flood, because the supposed 4 rivers that they flow into Edom, because it just says the river goes out from Edom. It doesn't mean it's flowing out from there. It just means that these 4 rivers water Edom. Okay? And what you're going to have is, if you look at a map of the Persian Gulf and the riverbeds, you're actually going to see 4 riverbeds come to an intersection down here in the Persian Gulf. Okay? It's saying that there's 4 rivers that go out that water the whole land of Eden. Well, it doesn't mean it flows downhill from Eden. It means the rivers go out from the garden. The garden's in the middle, and the rivers go out because they're flowing into it to water it. Okay? And so where Eden probably is right down here at the bottom, and that's why you have the Tigris, Euphrates, and the other 2 rivers seem to come from, one seems to come from Iran, one seems to come all the way over from these mountains in Western Arabia, and it's now just a dry riverbed, but it used to be a great big river. So it seems to be there were 4 rivers that flowed into Eden. I don't know how that worked. Where did the water go once it got to Eden? I don't know. Was there a big sea in the middle? I don't know. But that seems to be where Eden is down here. And then you're going to have so you're going to have archaeological records of stuff that's over here that seems to be pre-flood, and it seems to be thousands of years older. Well, that's because you're going to have 1,600 years before the flood, all starting right around here. Okay. And then when Nimrod's people come over, remember, we're going to have records of the Sumerians trading all the way up in here. I think his Akkad or Agade is their city. They have archaeological proof that these guys were trading with people in Oman and Qatar. Okay, so these are the other Kushites. The Kushites are going to be all along here on the coast, Yemen, Oman, probably Qatar, and then they're going to extend up here into the Ganges River. I think this is the Indus, but it's basically Pakistan. Okay, and they're going to get all the way up here into the Hindu Kush, and according to the Persian records, Kush had fathered children with I forget some woman, and they became the Indians. Okay, and they basically are going to migrate up in here. Ham is going to be buried in a village up these rivers. Like these are if you start to research these different guys' burial sites, this is approximately where Ham is buried. And the Hindu Kush is basically the Himalayan glacial ices that essentially turn into I think this is the Indus River. I'm going to get these mixed up because I know the Ganges River and the Indus River, I think one of them dried up or something like that. So I haven't researched the Indian stuff in as much detail yet. Okay. So once Nimrod's empire falls apart, this is all going to start to break down. Okay. You're going to have Nimrod's empire. You're going to have a bunch of different city-states trying to reemerge and be the OG again. They're not going to last that long. And by the time you get to Joshua's day, you're going to have another person that's descended from the Kushites. We're here. It's called the Kassite dynasty. Okay, and you're gonna hear the king of Mesopotamia, Kushan something, and it seems to be related to the Kushites who make a little bit of a comeback. But for a while, the Amorites are going to take them over, and then the Amorites are going to fall apart once Joshua and Moses kick the crap out of the Amorites over here. And then these Amorites over here are mixed in with probably Hittites and probably Armenians, and they're going to become kind of a mixed civilization, so they're not going to be all related. And so that kingdom's going to fall apart. The Hittites are going to fall apart, and they're going to fall apart. And then this Kashite or Kushite dynasty comes in. And that dynasty seems to last for a while, and then I forget what happens after that. I think that dynasty is actually going to last until the Assyrians start to be powerful. But you're going to have a bunch of short-lived dynasties here, okay? But in the meantime, next to all these short-lived dynasties, you're going to have the Medes be pretty stable, okay? And the Medes are not going to. What their claim is, we don't know a lot about the Medes because they don't have a lot of historical records, okay? We have this Helmanu here, Hagmatana or Ecbatana is what it's going to be called by Alexander the Great, is the capital of the Medes, okay? And you see the Armenians right here. These are other descendants of Gomer. Remember, Gomer and Madai would have been brothers, okay? You're going to have Togarma, which would have been basically a nephew of the Medes. He's going to be the father of the Turkish people, which are going to be all around the Caspian Sea and up into the Stan countries. And these people are going to all mix and become all these tribes. And the reason they spread so far and so fast, the Kushites are spreading by sea very fast. And you're going to read about this in Isaiah, how they send papyrus reed boats all over the world, okay? They're going to become the Polynesians. They're going to go everywhere, okay? Well, these guys spread really far, really fast because they corner the market on horse breeding, okay? Everybody who has horses in the world, everybody, I don't care if they're Arabian or Egyptian horses or whatever, they're getting them from these guys up here, and then they breed them, okay? These guys master the horse, which is why they're going to get their carts are going to be able to pull their stuff, and they're going to be able to ride and get to the next river before they die of thirst, okay? and they're going to be able to just spread far and wide, and they're going to spread really fast. These guys, by this time, they're already up into what we call Russia, what we call Ukraine, what we call Mongolia. They're already up there, okay? They're not huge civilizations because they're spreading far and wide, and they don't grow and become heavily populated very fast because they're spread so far. But they're eventually going to become heavily populated, and they're going to be able to crash down on these people with big, huge armies of horses with bows. And that's what they do. And they become the Scythians, they become the Huns, they become all these people. But in the meantime, in the interim, they seem to relatively peacefully compared to these guys. Because remember how jacked up this region is. It starts with a guy who is not a patriarchal descendant taking over. And then you just have these continual wars for who's in charge. And the main propagators of war, the main aggressors, seem to be these Amorite Canaanites here, these Hittites over here, which are Canaanites, and these Cushites over here. They're all rebels, okay? And so because of this, you have a lot more war and conflict over who's going to rule, where here it's mostly peaceful tribal heads and mostly patriarchal. You're going to have less people trying to take over. And it seems like the big takeovers start when these guys start to go, hey, we're over here, and this is territory that Noah allotted to us. And you see the Indus River over here? And there's these Cushites here. And we have horses, and we're stronger, and we're more powerful. What are they doing in our turf? And they just push them out. And that's why you have this hugely densely populated southern India with tons and tons and tons of very dark-skinned people, lots of language groups. And these are mostly, I believe, Cushites and Canaanites. Okay? While the people in the north are primarily descended from, again, this is going to be up in Afghanistan. This down here is Pakistan. This over here is Afghanistan. These are going to be mostly descended from Turkish peoples. Okay? Now, we lose a lot of this history because all this has been taken over by Islam, and Islam is going to impress the religions that aren't Islamic. They're going to start out by saying you just got to pay the jizya tax, but the whole thing about just paying the jizya tax is just about getting people to think we're not going to oppress your religion later, just pay us the tax. And that tax fuels their armies to keep going and expand further. And then once they've got that territory on lock, then they do start to oppress your religion, okay? Because what Muhammad is doing, or what the Muslims are doing, is exactly what Nimrod was doing. We're spreading the one true faith, okay? And the one true faith just so happens to be racist and based around them being in charge. This is often how the one true faith goes, even with the Jews in the Maccabean period. We are the chosen people of the one true faith, and we're meant to rule over you. Okay? That's what Calvinism is doing in Christianity right now. So don't be shocked when this keeps happening, because that's just human nature. It's not what God says to do. He only told the Jews to do this in this promised land in Canaan because these Canaanites were especially wicked, and so he promised their land to Abraham. Okay? But anyways, these guys are going to spread here relatively peacefully, and this core of Akbatana seems to be the core of where the Medes were. It doesn't get overthrown. It never gets overthrown, really, until Alexander the Great. So you're talking 1700 BC to around, I think, 325 BC, I think, is when Alexander the Great was. So you're talking about, 1400 years of relative stability. Now, these guys are also not massively expansionists trying to form this huge empire. This, what you see here, mostly occurs because, remember, this was the Assyrian Empire right here, okay? And the Assyrians rise up and start pushing on them, and they start attacking Median cities. That's really what happens. The Assyrians don't have a really long-lived empire in terms of the big picture scope, because they're mostly oppressed by Nimrod, and then they're oppressed by the Hittites and the Mitanni. And then when those people basically get ousted by the Jews, or by the Israelites, and that allows the Aramaeans and the Assyrians to start growing and start expanding their kingdoms. And so you see the northern Israelites fighting with the Aramaeans for a while, and then they basically are frenemies with them. They're fighting sometimes, allies at other times, and then Assyria comes in and takes over all of them. Well, at the same time they start doing this, they also start attacking these other Median cities. And the Medians, who, remember, these are large people groups that are spread out far and wide with horses, they start growing to basically oppose the Assyrians. And then they're going to eventually ally with the Babylonians, because the Babylonians are Chaldeans and Cushites. Okay, they don't like the Assyrians ruling over them. They want to have their glory days back, and so they say, well, let's ally together and let's overthrow Assyria, and they do. And then the Babylonians basically take over the Middle Eastern portion of their empire, but they never mess with the Medians. They never mess with the Medians, and that's smart of them. Okay. Now, these Elamites down here are Semites. These are all Japhethites, except for the Magi, who are also Semites, okay? The Medes are eventually going to be like, we like this taking over and ruling everything stuff, and since we're Japhethites and we're meant to be dominant, we're going to sack Babylon too. And I don't know all the details. I'm going to get into that history later. Maybe they were messing with them a bit. But it seems to be for over 1,000 years, they had relatively peaceful trade relationships with the Babylonians here and the Susans here. And if you can look at this map real close, that's because their rivers, see, here's where Ecbatana is, okay? Just flow right down into Susa, and they flow right down into the Tigris River. And so all they would do is, from ancient times, these guys would be up here. Remember, this is mountainous. So nobody's trying to go up a mountain to conquer some people on the other side, okay? That is not a popular battle plan, okay? You want to get these main trade routes on these big flat lands where merchants go from Egypt to Babylon and to Anatolia, okay? And so if you can control this right here, this main traffic lane, you're going to have the sea trade that's going to India and to Arabia and to Africa. You're going to have the sea trade over here that's going to Grecia and Egypt. And then you're going to have the land trade that's coming from Egypt and Anatolia in this. And so you've got a very good setup if you just control this fertile crescent here. And it's all good farmland. That's why it's called the Fertile Crescent. You're not trying to go up these mountains and conquer these people on the other side. And you don't even know how many there are over there. So we're not just trying to pick a fight just to pick a fight. And so the Medes are just going to keep growing. And yeah, they got horses. Yeah, they got chariots. They're mostly just using them for carrying goods around. I'm sure they're having their wars and stuff. And they're going to keep spreading out and building up their numbers. And eventually some king comes along and he's pissed off and he gets... it's usually some guy who, if you read these stories, whether it's Genghis Khan or I think it's either Darius or Cyrus, one of the two, of the Persians, or even Shaka Zulu. If you go watch the movie Shaka Zulu, okay, it's always some guy who gets slighted, like he's a bastard, or somebody killed his dad and tried to throw him out in the wilderness and somebody saved him. It's always some guy like this who comes and makes a comeback, and he's bitter and he's pissed, and he just starts rallying troops around him, and he starts getting the embittered and the pissed like Absalom does, and he forms an army, and that army just starts getting aggressive and just starts killing everybody. You don't regularly have people just trying to, let's just have a war for glory. No. You have eras of this, and then you have people who do this, and then their kids do it, and then their kids do it, and those people become dominant for years. And then what ends up happening is all these people who are dominant, aggressive, and violent, they start fighting one another, which is what you have in Europe with the Germanic tribes, the Franks, basically. It's what you have in Babylon with all the guys who are going to be descended from Nimrod, and then these other Cushites who probably had a right to rule based on patriarchy. And you're going to have it with Genghis Khan and the Khans, okay? Same thing's going to keep happening. It's the same old song and dance over and over and over again. Two bullies, and eventually a bully from the old school goes to the bully from the new school, or the two junior highs come into two elementary school bullies, show up in junior high together, and they're either going to end up being friends and fight everybody, or they're going to fight each other to the death and hate each other always. Okay, why? Because I was the toughest kid in school, and you're the toughest kid in school, and now we're in the same school. And that's just what happens. And the world just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Okay? But this period of 1,000 years, this is very stable, and these guys are speaking this language called Old Avestan. Now, if you look at Old Avestan script, this is what it looks like. And if you say, hey, boy, that seems to look a lot like Arabic, it's because it does. It's a left to right calligraphal language, Okay, everybody else is using the Aramaic script, which we know as modern Hebrew. But this left to right calligraphy language is basically going to be the Old Avestan language that they use, and the only stuff we have of this language are the early Zoroastrian hymns and stuff like that. Okay, so it's been around for a very long time. It's going to morph over time, and it's going to become New Avestan under the Median Empire, and then in the Achaemenid Empire, I think it becomes Middle Persian, and it's going to change. And it looks like that's where the Arabs pick it up. And the Arabic script seems to be, let's see, borrowed from the Sassanids. Okay. Here is the Sassanid script. Here is the Arabic script. Okay. They're not exactly alike, but you see similarities in how they're written, okay? So their alphabets are going to be very different because this is a Japhethite language and this is a Semite language, okay? The sounds of the letters are going to be closer to Hebrew or Aramaic, but the look of the script is going to be closer to Persian, okay? And several of the Indian languages. India has 4 alphabets, okay? You can see some of them. Here's Urdu. Here's one of them. It looks closer to... apparently they've got 9 alphabets. People think India is a united country. It is not. Okay, they have 9 different alphabets. I know people who are Malayalam. Urdu, that looks a lot like Arabic. Bengali is going to be over in the west, and you see as they change. Over in the east. As you get further in the east, it's going to start to look more like Chinese, and that's probably because they're borrowing from Thai. Thai and Chinese and stuff like that. And these guys are going to have symbols that are going to reflect each other's stuff, okay? But you see kind of a continuity in the look of the script from Arabic to Persian, okay? But the OG of all these is this Old Avestan language. The old OG of that kind of script, which in ours is like cursive, okay? The reason these scripts are like this is because you're writing with a pen rather than imprinting with something, okay? Cuneiform was based on an imprinting you were doing in clay, and it looks like Phoenician was similar to that, but they start switching over to papyrus. And once you're switching over to papyrus and lambskins and stuff like that for your writing, well, ink is better, and when you have ink, what you don't want to do is pick up your pen, because that's going to create an ink blot every time you pick it up, or every time you touch down again, and your letters are going to be skewered. You're not going to be able to read them that well, okay? So you want to have something where you keep your pen on the paper the whole time you're writing, and that's how it turns into stuff like this, okay? I suck at writing. I'm not going to claim to be an expert in this. I'm just telling you a little bit of stuff about origins of languages. The point I'm making to you is this is very stable for a long time, which, even though it's absorbing ideas that are mostly coming from Babylon, it's projecting ideas onto Hinduism, its ideas are probably some of the most stable religious ideas of all the pagan religions. Chinese are going to be very stable too. That's why Confucianism and I mean, we're going to have a period of religious explosion that's going to happen after the temples of Jerusalem is destroyed. But you're going to have pretty stable religious ideas, okay? And the OG of all of them seems to be Zoroastrianism. Now, a few more facts. According to the Book of Jubilee, so we're going to have multiple accounts of this. Canaan found a rock. It was a rock pillar inscribed with a pre-flood religion that was taught by the Watchers. Okay? Remember, he is taking myths from the Book of the Giants and adding it to this. According to Josephus said the Sethites said that Adam had two prophecies that he received from God, that the earth is going to be destroyed once by flood and once by a fire, but he didn't know which one was first. So his descendants, these are the Sethites, learned all this astronomical and like almanac data, okay? This was useful information for farming, for the rise and fall of tides and floodwaters and stuff like this. And this is stuff that, when I was up in the UP, when I was living up there, you'd have people tell about how every so many years their winter is a lot worse because of the water level rise. People knew this stuff, okay? And they knew this stuff worldwide. Well, the astronomical record, what we call the zodiac, to them was just a calendar system, okay? That's all it was. It was a calendar with short and long cycles. And according to Josephus, he basically said God allowed the early descendants to live long years so they could learn these short and long cycles and then pass them on to their descendants, okay? Josephus seems to be thinking positively about astrological charts and stuff like that. And so does the author Jubilees to a degree, okay? What they're saying is that there's basically a 600-year cycle. This is in Josephus. It's also in Zoroastrianism, okay? That there's a 600-year cycle, and what these cycles are is you have your annual cycle, and then you have a bigger cycle that seems to be related to the and I don't know exactly how this works out, but it seems to be related to the Milky Way galaxy, okay? The point is there are these cycles, and there are things that have to do with gravity in the stars and things like that they believe affect short and long cycles of ebbs and flows of things like weather and tides and floodwaters and stuff like that, okay? Now, there probably is limited truth to this, but probably not great truth to this. And what the main myth seems to be that develops out of this is that Noah's flood is just a periodic thing. That's what the lie seems to be, is that Noah's flood is a periodic thing that happens systematically because everything is written by the stars, and what you have is the primordial formations of deism, okay? The idea that God is not really interacting, these things are just happening periodically because they're dictated by the stars, okay? Again, remember, they're thinking of stars like gods, and they're thinking of the stars that go off course once a year as the wandering stars. Those are the high gods, and the rest of them are fixed in what they can do, and these high gods have a little bit more play because they're higher gods, okay? So Josephus says the Sethites carved all their knowledge of astronomy on these two pillars, one being brick, one being rock, so that if the flood came first, the rock one would survive. If the fire came first, the clay one would survive, because clay you can put in a fire, okay? Or this would be like ceramic pottery, okay? And so Enoch is going to say that Enoch was the one who got all that information from the Watchers and put it down, okay? Here's the real story. This is what I think the real story is. So the book of Enoch is counting Enoch as learning writing from the Watchers and taking all the secret information from the Watcher angels and passing it down to humans. I think the book of Enoch is absolute bullcrap. I think it's totally made up bullcrap. I think you should throw it in the garbage and you shouldn't get anything from it. I think the book of Jubilees is largely bullcrap. It's taking some stuff from Genesis, some stuff from the book of Enoch, and some stuff from, I believe, Magian records, and making a BS Genesis, basically. It's also taking stuff from Second Temple Judaism, which is super racist, okay, and mixing it all together. I think the book of the Testimonies of the 12 Patriarchs is just built on that, and it's BS too. The Book of the Giants is the origin of all the BS, but what you're seeing is you're basically seeing Zoroastrianism merged into Judaism. So you're going to have your 7 spheres, your 7 angels, your 7 heavens. You're going to have this information that came from the Watchers, and Josephus, who seems to be much more secular. Now, he does believe in Nephilim because he accounts Nephilim, okay? So he seems to be related to the Sadducees, but he's not so much of a Sadducee that he doesn't believe in angels, okay? So he seems to be kind of like an intellectual that's just looking at things from a more secular perspective. he says the Sethites carved this information. He's not saying it came from the angels or the watchers. They carved it onto the rocks, and that apparently was known from their day. While Jubilees is saying Canaan was taught by Ham. Remember, Ham was pre-flood, how to read this stuff. And because Canaan was taught by Ham how to read it, Canaan went and started transcribing it all down. And Canaan, remember, he's going to be around for 200-300 years before Nimrod gets here, and he starts forming a religion around it. Okay? And that religion seems to be based on fatalistic determinism. This is important because as I write this book, I'm going to show you how this comes in all the way to Philo and turns into Calvinism. It's going to turn into Calvinism because Calvinism is really just fatalistic determinism, and the OG fatalistic determinism was that the fate was written in the stars. Your destiny is written in the stars. The stars dictate your future, and it's just all pre-written, and it's not based on what you do and the choices that you make. God is just he's dictated how everything is going to be, and then that philosophy turns into a philosophy of determinism based on God's unchanging nature, which starts with Pythagoras, and then it continues on with the Stoics, and then it continues on with Philo, and it continues on with Clement and Origen of Alexandria and Augustine, and then turns into the Calvinistic determinism. Okay, it's all based on the idea that God is a permanent, unchanging, fixed whatever he is, and he just doesn't really do anything. Everything that happens in history is just dictated. This is what Calvinists believe. Well, that's what Zoroastrians believe too. They just said, and the stars tell us how it's dictated. Okay, so all they're doing is taking what Genesis says, that the stars will be for signs for days and weeks and months and years, which a lot of Christians do now, and think that means they're telling us stuff about the future. That's not what God meant when he said there's signs for days and weeks and months and years. What he meant is that everything is circular. It's a clock, okay? The solar system is circular. The galaxy is circular, okay? The sun, moon, stars, the earth, everything is circular. Everything goes in circular patterns. They're clocks, and you can calculate big hand, small hand based on the sun, moon, and stars. Okay, we have the same thing in a clock. We have a second hand, a minute hand, and the point is you can calculate. You can come up with calendars that demonstrate these cycles, and those cycles correspond to planting seasons, and they're also going to eventually correspond to religious festivals that God's going to ordain. Okay. But those festivals that God ordains are all based on months. Okay, this is why when you have people with their long calendars, their astrological calendars, their jubilee calendars, when all of God's festivals are on the 10th month. Month is based on a moon. Okay, so here's your moon cycle. Okay, the first month, moon goes from full moon to no moon to full moon again. Okay, that's a month. And he's saying on the 10th month, so there's a lunar cycle, okay? The author of the Book of Jubilees does not like the lunar cycle. Well, why? Well, the lunar cycle does take you off course in terms of the solar cycle. Yes, it does. Was it always like that, though? We know some major things have happened astronomically, like the sun going backwards or the sun sitting still in the day. God interacted with it. God changed some things. Well, did those things affect the calendar? We don't know, but what we do know is once upon a time, everybody kept a 360-day year. Everyone. Okay? But we know a month is 28 days, not 30 days. So why is everyone keeping a 360-day year? Did things change? Maybe they did. We don't know. Okay? All we know is that once upon a time, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, everyone kept a 360-day year. It seems like some things have changed astronomically. Okay? We don't know, but what we do know is when the Bible records times and we get into Daniel's 70th week, Daniel's 70th week is based on 360-day years. It's not going to be a full 7-year period. Okay? It's based on 360-day years, which means you're going to be about a month shy. Okay? You're going to be a little over like 40 days shy of 7 full years. Okay? So there seems to be something with a 360-day year. The point is it was all a calendar. It was all a calendar meant to have you keep track of planting and harvesting and sowing and religious festivals that God eventually is going to appoint. Remember, he doesn't appoint any religious festivals based on the calendar until Moses. You're going to have Calvinists, Hebrew roots people, and the Pharisaical Jews back in the day all trying to claim that these festivals and these calendrical cycles and stuff like that predated Moses, and they didn't. They didn't predate Moses at all. You had months. You always had months because you have moons, okay? And you have Noah's flood marking basically a new calendar date. And then you're going to have Passover mark a new calendar date, okay? And so you're going to have major events occur that God's going to say, mark this event. This is now the start of a new year for you. Okay? This is your new... Because remember, months were just months. Well, how many months is in a year? Well, you have a new year now coming, and that used to be around the harvest season, and now it's not simply around the harvest season. And now it's on major events like the flood or like the Passover. Okay? And so that's where your first new year comes from. And then other people are going to have other New Years based on other things, okay? So we don't need to know all these deep astrological records to keep the feasts of the Lord, to know when to reap and sow and all this stuff. But these guys would keep these long cycles, and what they would be able to keep track of is things like eclipses. How often an eclipse comes. How often that comet shows up, okay? And what these guys were able to do, because they had this really ancient knowledge that was made by people who lived to be almost 1,000 years old, is they would know that Halley's Comet shows up every 70 years or so, and we can say it's a sign, and when it comes, we can say, this sign means that you're meant to go conquer your enemies, and God says, so that you'll know this sign will occur, and this comet shows up, and they're like, wow, it occurred just like he said. We've never seen this before. Well, the guys who've been studying astrology for 300 years have seen it 3 times before. So yes, we know when it happens, but your average person who now lives to be 70 years old has never seen it before. Okay? And unless they have written records, this is why countries would come and conquer and destroy all the written records of the people before them. Unless you had a priesthood or somebody who's keeping track of astrology for a long time, you're not going to know this stuff. And so we're able to dupe you into sacrificing people like they do in Apocalypto. Okay? That kind of stuff happened. And basically what the Jews are going to do is they're going to take this knowledge, which a lot of people take seriously, and the Jews are taking this extra biblical calendrical knowledge seriously now. They're going to say, well, that's because it all came from Enoch, and this is bullcrap. What this is there's Jews mixing astrology, mixing Zoroastrianism in with Judaism to become the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees and stuff like this. We know for an absolute certainty that this stuff was in Zoroastrianism much longer than it was in Judaism. I mean, centuries and centuries and centuries longer, okay? So we know Judaism is ripping off Zoroastrianism. You don't trust Enoch, you don't trust Jubilees, you don't trust any of those books, okay? There's going to be an occasional piece of information that probably has some truth to it, and I'm going to be very clear, it says probably has some truth in it, okay? Because these people are going to have genealogical records, okay? But you got to remember that you're going to have things like the Sumerians, King's List. You're going to have certain royal lines that are fudging dates in order to make their dynasty appear descended from the gods or the one true basically kingdom that was meant to rule forever or whatever, okay? But the Medes up here aren't really doing that, okay? They have a pretty short period of doing this. Look at 1678 to 549 BC. That's 120 years of conquest, okay? And then the Persians are going to take it over from them, okay? They don't do this for a long time. They're mostly up here in the mountains, and these people are getting overthrown, and all they do is they maintain their trade relationships with the cities that are over there. You're going to have the Armenians doing it with, the Haran and with Assyria, okay? And then you're going to have the Medes doing it with Babylon and Susa primarily, okay? And they're going to have obviously cities up here, upriver, that are going to grab that trade and get them better market price and trade it downhill. But the point is these people are going to get trade goods that come from outside, and a lot of that, the reason you want stable relationships with these people is because the one good thing that you can get from them that you can't really breed a lot of in the desert is horses, because they can have these horses go around grazing all over the place and then bring them down to you. Cattle, it's another thing. I mean, these people have cattle here. These people get lots of cattle and stuff like that because you can graze them all over the place and then, rustle them up and go bring them down to market, okay? So why are you going to start crap with these people? You're not going to. One is because you don't know how many people they can rally on the other side, and two is you got good, stable trade goods coming from them, okay? And so these guys don't have a reason to go destroy other people's records. They also don't seem to have a lot of written records of their own, okay? Most of their stuff, they are probably using cuneiform, like they're reading other people's stuff. They have their religious scriptures, and most of the stuff is going out as basic trade. It's not dynastic histories and stuff like that. They're not trying to establish themselves as the kings of the whatever, okay? The Jews have a reason to do that because God told them to. The king of the world who's going to save all humanity, who's going to be God in the flesh, is going to come from you. Keep track. The other great kings are all keeping track because, they're trying to prove something. Jews are trying to prove something. These guys aren't trying to prove something. They're just living their lives, and they're just, here's their religion. Well, their religion was corrupted by Canaan, so he's got them thinking astrology. He's got them thinking 7 archangels. But their basic religion is not so crazy that God would feel the need to send somebody to go, okay, you got to fix these people. What do they think you're doing? Good thoughts, it's literally good thoughts, good words, good deeds. That's what their religion breaks down. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds. I'm not saying it's not wrong. I'm not saying the gospel wasn't meant to supplant it. Okay? What I'm saying is the way their religion is you didn't have people sacrificing their children and stuff like that. The weirdest stuff that they would do is that they would leave they believe like water and fire were holy, okay? Because God is a consuming fire, and guess what? The Holy Spirit lighted upon the waters, and so they're going to associate like the lotus flower with the Holy Spirit, okay? Ahura Mazda literally means the Lord of Wisdom. So they're going to have really basic beliefs about God that you can tell are traceable back to whatever primordial prehistory they had from Noah. Okay? It's not going to be that complicated, but there is going to be stuff in it that's more complicated that you can tell is borrowing from these myths that come from Nimrod and all this stuff. Okay? So there's going to be stuff in it about this Angra Manu. Manu just basically means spirit, and then you're going to have, I forget, Ahura Manu, I think. Oh, I'm sorry, Spenta means spirit. They're going to have these 7 angels, okay, which almost correspond to the 7 attributes of the Holy Spirit in Isaiah 11. And we don't know for certain. Again, there are stuff that goes all the way back to the 1700s BC, but most of what we know about this stuff comes from the period of the Achaemenid dynasty because it's the official religion of the Persian Empire, okay? Now, what do we know about the Persian Empire? They are favorable towards the Jews. God called Cyrus his anointed, and these people seem to be generally pretty good, okay? Generally not into sacrificing babies and doing crazy stuff. I'm sure there was corruption. I'm sure there was homosexuality. I'm sure all this corruption was among them. They absorbed all this stuff from the Babylonians eventually, but this is these spirits. These spirits are the spirit of or immortality, Holy Spirit. That means kind of like right thinking to them. Spirit of truth and righteousness, good purpose, favorable dominion, wholeness, devotion. Okay, compare that to the 7 attributes of the Holy Spirit in Isaiah 11. You have the Spirit of the Lord. That's Godhood, immortality. Spirit of wisdom, that's Holy Spirit mentality. Spirit of understanding, truth and righteousness. Spirit of counsel, good purpose. Spirit of might, favorable dominion. Spirit of knowledge, wholeness, that means, body, mind, soul, everything is synced up. Fear of the Lord, theirs is called holy devotion, okay? This could have been influenced by Daniel, who would have had it from Isaiah, Or this could have been, again, I believe the original version of this was based on the 7 visible planets. They could have just taken these things randomly and said these seem good, and it's just more of a philosophy. But what they do have is they have Ahura Mazda, who's called the one who begets wisdom, or the Lord of Wisdom. That's how it etymologically translates. Either the one who begets wisdom, so they look at wisdom as a created being, and he is the Lord of the wisdom. Okay? That's not terribly distinct of what the Proverbs are saying about wisdom if you translate it in the Greek, and maybe that's how it translated to them. Remember, Daniel was over the Magi at one point in time, so they could be getting this stuff from Daniel, but Ahura Mazda seemed to predate this, okay? If Ahura Mazda is the Lord of Wisdom and wisdom is the Holy Spirit, they're saying the Lord of Wisdom is basically like the husband of the Holy Spirit, okay? He is the only one who is uncreated and the upholder of truth and justice. His enemy is Angramayu, which just means evil spirit, who is the source of all darkness and evil. He created the world with a thought. Now think about this. It says God created the heavens and the earth, but the first recorded thing he said is, let there be light. So that would mean he created the universe with a thought, okay? But is connected to it through Amesha Spenta, 7 spirits representing 7 virtues, okay? That very much could have originally been the Holy Spirit that became 7 distinct beings, okay? Well, you have 7 spirits before the throne in the book of Revelation, so that one, many, plurality, is that an attribute, or is that a being? Is there a modalism within the Holy Spirit, or is the Holy Spirit one spirit with 7 attributes or 7 spirits? It's one of those mysteries. We don't know. There's verses in the Bible that don't make that specifically clear, okay? And they could add something similar and interpreted it similar, okay? The first 7 days are devoted to a great heptad and creation, okay? This is from Zoroastrianism, not from Judaism, okay? The first 7 days are a great heptad. So the whole thing about 7,000 years, that's the great heptad, okay? Could have had its origin in Zoroastrianism, or Zoroastrianism could have gotten it from Daniel in the Bible. We don't know. We just know there's this very similar thing in it, okay? But it's also accounted to creation. Again, could they have gotten that from the Bible? Or they could have just faithfully kept it from Noah, okay? Just because it's in a foreign relation, or just because it's in a pagan religion, don't assume automatically that it has a malicious source. Think of these things as like mixtures of lies made up by priests with truth. Could it be demonic? Yes, it could be. Could it be man's speculation? Yes, it could be. Could it be reading records that were after the confusion of languages and just making mistakes? It could be that too. God apparently didn't feel the need to send prophets to every one of these religions and say, here's what's wrong, here's what's right, here's what's wrong, here's what's right. Remember, there was a time when all the kings of the whole world were coming to Solomon for his wisdom. So there was a time where these things were probably relatively united in terms of their beliefs. Solomon was the richest man in the world. His kingdom had fully conquered the Canaanites. It had. I mean, you're talking about a people by that time who had put down the Egyptians and who had basically assisted in the downfall of the Hittites and the Mesopotamians, Babylonians, and the Canaanites, which were all the most powerful kingdoms in the world. And now they have this one great king who has this golden temple where God lives, and there's this smoke and this fire and this weird stuff going on that if you go up to this mountain, like, God's there. Okay? You have this stuff that's going on that people took note of, and kings from the whole world went to Solomon to see his wisdom. So there was probably a time where you have kind of a revival of religious truth in the earth that stays there, and then it, kind of fizzles away towards when the temple is destroyed, and that's when you have this boom of all these other distinct religions. We don't know how much of what Zoroastrianism has came from before or after this period, or was influenced by Daniel, but we know for a certainty it was influenced by Daniel, okay? So we're not going to overly speculate on how this is connected. We're just going to acknowledge, hey, that seems to be what the Bible teaches, and that seems to be what Judaism and Christianity teach. So we're just going to acknowledge things that are true. This religion is having a revival now in Iraq, because Islam is because the Kurds have passed new laws in the region because of all the problems they'd have with ISIS and crap like that, that they're not going to make people follow Islam. Okay, and so Zoroastrianism is coming out of the closet. Okay, that's where most of your mystery religions come from. Remember, religion is largely propaganda, and so you have all the like different religious sects, just like when the Catholics take over Rome, and you have basically the what are they called? The proto-charismatics from back in the day, Montanists, they go underground. Monastics go underground, okay? You have these other sects, that the Novatians go underground, okay? Novatians I don't consider to be heretical at all. I consider the Montanists to be in error on some things, but not definitely heretical, except for the fact that they're like charismatics and Pentecostals who say we have the Spirit and they don't, okay? So they're wrong and heretical in that sense, but they're not trying to alter the Godhead or anything major. They just, it's two wrong ideas. One is cessationist effectively, and one is hyper-charismatic effectively, okay? Well, it's the same thing back then. You're going to have people who are, when Islam comes around, Zoroastrianism goes underground, okay? You're going to have a competition between Manichaeanism and Zoroastrianism in the Sassanid period, which is going to be right before Islam comes around, okay? These religions don't disappear and go away because their scriptures don't go away. Just like Christianity, you have people who are devoted to these things who are going to save this stuff, okay? But what their scriptures seem to be mostly related to is honor and devotion to God. There's somehow some bull guy in there, okay, who's kind of like a god, and they believe that the way they describe it is they don't describe it as Nephilim, even though there is a book of the giants around them. They describe it as like all the plants and animals came from the bull and all the humans came from Gomayard. Okay? So it looks like they're trying to church up the Nephilim myth, and they're doing it wrongly. Are they doing it because they're mistranslating because of the Tower of Babel? I'm sure God had a lot of grace for people who are getting religious ideas wrong because of the Tower of Babel. He is looking at the heart. What are these guys trying to do? Good thoughts, good deeds, good actions, okay? They do believe in kind of like life being a purgatorial process. They also believe in a final destruction, but they are universalist. See, they basically believe in a final destruction of the world, and people either going back to God or to hell. But if they go to hell, it's a purgatorial process, and then they eventually go to heaven. So they're universalists, okay? I am convinced. Now, I used to think that, I take that back. Origen's religion, Origen is such a not Christian, okay? Everything he believes either comes from Zoroastrianism or Brahmanism or Greek myths of the migration of souls and all this stuff like this. But all that's based in Zoroastrianism. And the Egyptians is where you get reincarnation from. Remember, Pythagoras studied with the Magi for like 15 years, studied with the Egyptians for like 20 years. He's just going to mix the two things together. And he's going to come up with the one true faith, which is the Pythagorean cult, which becomes Greek philosophy. Just like you're going to have whoever this modern Zoroaster is, just like you're going to have Buddha, like you're going to have Mani, just like you're going to have Bahula, just like you're going to have all these last great prophets. Muhammad's one of these guys, okay? They pull ideas from a bunch of different religions and say everyone's wrong and I'm right. It's kind of what I'm doing. I'm just not trying to be the last prophet. I'm trying to sort this stuff out and say what's true and what's false. The difference between me and them is I'm saying the Bible is my primary witness. Everything else needs to line up. But I'm not going to be so daft as to go, okay, the genealogy in Luke and the genealogy in Genesis don't line up, but somehow they're both true because I'm religiously bound to believing they're both true, even though my brain can't compute that. I'm not going to do that. I don't believe God needs me to. Okay? So Zoroastrianism, he is going to... it's accounted in the world as the true origin of monotheism. Now I want you to hear why. Okay? And this is why... This kind of, when you hear me say stuff about like, I don't hold to a strict monotheism, what I mean is monadism, okay? There's monism, which is everything and everything is God, okay? Monism is basically what exists in dialectical Marxism and in panentheism, okay? That's monism, Okay? Monadism is that there is one singular alone being that predates everything. Okay? And that's what most of the world thinks when you say monotheism. That's what Muslims think. That's what Zoroastrians think. That's what Greek philosophers think when you say monotheism. That means that there was one being all alone before anything was created. And that wisdom, or the Holy Spirit, is a secondary creation, or a primary creation, and the Logos, the Word, is a primary creation. So they think of those as created beings. So this would be Arianism. Arianism would be monotheism in that sense, okay? Trinitarianism, as it is expressed in Catholicism and Calvinism and Orthodoxy, is closer to that than what I believe, okay? What they express, remember, in Orthodoxy, you had people who flat out believed that the Holy Spirit and Jesus were created, okay? Tatian the Syrian did, Origen definitely did, okay? The Arians definitely did, okay? They believed they were created in an eternal time before time, but they still believe they were created, okay? That's their idea of monotheism. Trinitarianism, this is why I don't hold to what people think of when they think of Trinitarianism. They think of the God the Father, God the Spirit, and God the Son as one person. And the Bible doesn't expressly say they're one person anywhere, okay? It insinuates that they're one in a way that they're more than just three people who happen to be in agreement. But it also talks about multiple humans in the exact same way. Okay? So I want you to understand I'm trying to hold strictly to the biblical language without overstepping it. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do my best with that, okay? I'm not trying to create a new way of seeing it. But what I see it as is there are three persons in the Godhead. All are eternal. All are divine. All are uncreated. That's what I would mean if I were to call it a Trinity. I don't call it a Trinity because a Trinity comes from the Triados, which is a monad that has two secondary beings that are created. That's the origin of the word Trinity, and I don't like it. Okay? I don't like using a word that definitely had its origin in meaning and definition in paganism and then just tweaking the definition. I don't like that. Okay? I also don't like the idea of talking about God as saying he's one person, because then you have all these attributes that belong to a single being when the reality is there's always three persons interacting with one another. Okay? There's always relationally three persons, and you need to think of the Godhead as relationally three persons all the time, because there was never a time when there was just one person alone. There was never a primordial, pre-eternal existence of just one person alone. God doesn't do things thinking about himself as the most important person, because that when the Bible uses God, they're talking about God the Father, and God the Father exalts the Son, guards the Holy Spirit. He's relationally like a husband to a wife and a child. Okay? He's not a self-absorbed narcissist who's just out for his own glory. So you don't put three persons as one person to say God's about himself primarily like the Calvinists do. Okay? That's not his character, and that's not what he's trying to reveal as his character. He's trying to reveal his character as humble and deferential, but also authoritative. Okay? That's how God, the Godhead as three persons, and also God the Father as an individual person, is trying to express himself, and the Calvinists don't express God the way he expresses himself. And the reason is because what they believe is closer to this, monotheism, where God can't change, he created everything, and everything's a reflection of who his unchanging self, and that's why it's dictated. They don't say by the stars, but that's why it's dictated and predetermined. Okay? I think they're wrong. I think they're closer to pagans than they are to Christians. Fact. And that's why they do the things that Muhammad did and Nimrod did, which is go try to conquer everyone and force them to submit to the one true faith. Okay? God never told us to do that. So, by the Achaemenid period, remember, Ahura Mazda was considered a single being, but wisdom, who is a separate goddess, was represented in the lotus flower, which is probably just a corruption of the Holy Spirit lighting on the waters. That was a secondary being. He had these seven spirits that ruled with him, and he was, I think he was even going to have a son. I think that was part of their mythology, okay? By the Achaemenid period, Ahura Mazda was worshipped in a triad with Mithra, the protector of cows, and Anahita, the goddess of the waters. So Anahita is their version of the Holy Spirit. The goddess of the waters reflected in the lotus flower because the Holy Spirit lights upon the water and the lotus flower lights upon the water. Okay? She became associated with Inanna Ishtar. In other words, by the Achaemenid Persian period, remember they had conquered Babylon, and Babylon has its own priests, and they believe in Inanna and Ishtar. They're merging the Holy Spirit with Ashtra. Okay? That's where they're getting Inanna or Ishtar. Okay? And so that starts to creep into Zoroastrianism and corrupt it, and Anahita starts to become associated with Ishtar. By the time this is going on, historically, Daniel's over the Magi in Susa. So you have probably a Zoroastrian receiving ideas from the Babylonian priesthood and from Judaism. So that's why I don't want to get into, what was first. I am not trying to make any kind of claim like Zoroastrianism had an originally true religion. What I'm trying to say is it of all the religions that were corrupted after Noah, it is probably the purest form of those. It's probably the one that stayed closest to the truth because it had less mixing over time. And it probably had more influence on the religions around them, both East and West, outside of Judaism, but including influencing Judaism than the other religions, because of the stability and the long-term stability of the Magi and of the Median Empire. Okay, so then you have this other guy named Attar, the son of Ahura. Remember, Ahura is like God the Father, okay? Attar is a healing and purgatorial fire by whom sins are cleansed. The religion was ultimately universalist, citing that all people would eventually be purified and return to Ahura. That seems to be the origin of Origen's universalism. The reincarnation seems to come from Pythagoras. The universalism seems to come from Zoroastrianism, okay? It also seems to be the true origin of Catholic purgatory. Catholic purgatory seems to be borrowing these ideas. So, yes, Catholicism is a mixed religion with paganism. Yes, it is. So is Orthodoxy. So is Calvinism. Okay, all of these are, and if you're not careful, so is yours. I have heard Chuck Missler talking positively about the zodiac. Okay, claiming that it was a prophecy. Okay, there's nothing that says the zodiac was a prophecy. Okay, what you have is different symbols in the sky, and that you can turn them into a bull and a calf and a fish or whatever, and then say, it's like a calendar going around because we're seeing it circulate through the year. Okay, that's all it is. That's all it is. It's when the moon is rising, the sun and the moon are rising. Which star pattern are they lining up with when they're lining up with the bear now? Okay, so we're in December, right? That's all it was meant to be seen as, okay? That's all original astronomy was. It was just calendrical cycles. It got turned into a religion, and any Christian who claims, remember, Isaiah is going to openly mock astrologers, okay? An observer of times, this is what the Bible would call a diviner, an observer of times, okay? They would say you put them to death. Okay, so an astrologer is a type of an observer of times, okay? An observer of times does not mean someone who's keeping track of the calendrical cycles and trying to determine what month it is so you can have the crop planting season or keep track of history, okay? An observer of times is somebody who's practiced in the religion of knowing long-term astrological cycles so that they can make false prophetic divination claims by that, okay? And the Jews were told to kill observers of time. So you're going to have this stuff creeping back. I just heard Jonathan Cahn claim some prophecy about the year of the dragon and the mystery of this. He's always coming up with the mystery of this because he's a mystery cultist. And he's like, and I just found out that in Chinese astrology, it's the year of the dragon. I don't give a crap if it's the year of the dragon, okay? That has no bearing on any biblical prophecy. That's zodiac astrology. It's just Chinese zodiac, okay? Don't mix this stuff in Because what you're doing is it's just a form of fatalistic determinism. Okay? Same thing with people who are going to say, oh, the Saturn is the king, or Jupiter is the king star and is passing through Virgo, and that's like the woman with the 12 from Revelation 12. That's astrology. That's not what Revelation 12 is telling you. Just because it says, I saw a sign in the heaven, does not mean it's an astrological sign. Okay? You're going to hear this in the Bible, and people are going to tell you that's astrological, and that's people who are doing this. They're mixing astrology with the Bible. No. What he's talking about is a sign that he saw in his vision in the heaven, but he's telling you, if you know your Bible, you know the dragon is Satan, and you know the woman is the woman who's given birth, and this is in Isaiah and Micah, and has nothing to do with the sign in the heaven. It's just telling you prophecies, and he's seeing a vision that corresponds to these prophecies, so he's telling you when those prophecies are coming to fulfillment. Okay? He's telling you, but he's also giving you day and year count, so you don't need to look at anything astrological. It's in Daniel's 70th week, and it's at the 3.5 year point that this stuff happens. Okay? So all we need to know is when Daniel's 70th week starts, and there's going to be two guys prophesying through that 3.5 years, making it very clear what time we're in. Okay? We don't need to know when this starts. We don't need to predict when it starts. We don't need the astrology for any of this. Okay? But the point is that the overarching point I want to make about Canaan and Zoroastrianism, again, I believe they're the same person. I believe Canaan and Nimrod is Zoroaster and Vishtashpa. I believe it's the same thing. Because it says they start the Canaanite dynasty, and the Canaanite dynasty goes from 2,000 years after Geomard, which I believe is Adam, which would correspond to the death of Noah, to the Achaemenid Empire. So this is basically the Medes. Remember, the Magi were in the Medes. From the time that Noah died, they were a single kingdom that, it expanded at one point, but it was mostly a single kingdom at Ecbatana that continued until it was basically overruled by the Persians in the Achaemenid Empire. Okay? So all the Canaanite dynasty is the descendants of Canaan, who are the Magi, and it is a rule based around the spreading of that religion. Okay? And Nimrod started it, and then Nimrod fell, but the Magi, who continued in that day, remained. Okay? And maybe Vishtashpa, maybe he was some guy who was with the Medes before that, who sponsored Canaan and kept it alive. But they're specifically talking about a guy who made it his mission to spread it through conquest, and the Medes didn't do that. Nimrod did. So that dynasty, the version of it that remained among the Medes, again, I'm thinking this is a later corruption that is basically trying to attribute their dynasty all the way back to the days of Noah, okay, is ripping off legend that is really Nimrod and Canaan. And that dynasty would have gone from roughly the 1730s BC to it's over 1,000 years. It's like 1,100 years. So it's to about the 530s BCE. So you're looking at a 1,200 year dynasty of the Medes that they're accounting. Okay? Later historians are going to say maybe this dynasty is part myth, part legend, or part true. They're not going to be able to make sense of it because big parts of it seem to be guys living a very long time. You're just going to have these short myths about these guys, but they don't say he lived from this year to this year. But there's way too few kings, and that's why they think it's a legendary dynasty. But they forget that when this would have started, people were still living to be 400 years old. And it's primarily a patriarchal dynasty, not a dictatorial rule dynasty, if that makes sense. Okay? So it very much, you're going to have from Noah to Joseph, you're going to have like not even a dozen generations, right? So there is probably a combination of myth and stuff like that in here, but what you're probably having is stuff that is going back to significant kings that were in their legends and stuff like that, and it's going to basically summarize the history of the Medes. Remember, the Medes weren't trying to be some big empire or anything like that, so they didn't have these very tight kingly records. They were mostly a patriarchal society, it looks like, until you get into really them starting to link up with the Persians and then start to be BA for a little while. Okay? So that's why I believe it's the purest form of the religion that came out of the Tower of Babel. And what I'm going to be doing is unraveling that towards what became the Greek stuff and what became the Hindu stuff. Those seem to be the main schools of thought. I don't know if there's any direct connection with the Chinese. I'm going to get into the I Ching because the I Ching seems to come around like 1100 BC. I'm going to get into the origins of that and see if that has anything to do with that, or if it's just a totally different system of divination. But because you have Chinese astrology, which probably would have originated with this, and because we know that Islam spread to China, Christianity spread to China, the Book of the Giants spread to China, it is very likely that versions of this spread to China as well. It'd be kind of strange if it didn't, because they're getting silk from China all the way to Persia in the days of the Romans. The Chinese weren't as disconnected as we like to think. They just weren't as easy to get to. But there were times when, like, for instance, the Parthian Empire and the Han Dynasty almost touched. Okay? So there were definitely trade routes between them, and there probably these religious ideas spread. Okay? So I'm going to try to keep unraveling this. Again, I'm putting these into slides because my last book I wrote, I did a lot of writing, then rewriting, then writing, then rewriting, as I'm researching. Whereas now I'm kind of just researching and making slides that I can keep changing. And then hopefully write it all into a book in a much shorter period of time. Hopefully, we'll see. Okay? But that period, again, this is going to cover most of your Eastern religions from 1700 BC. And I want you to understand their start date and then the date that I predict, if Usher is right, their start date and the date that I believe would have been when the Tower of Babel happens, which is right before the famine and Joseph is needing an interpreter. I believe that would be within a couple years of the start of Zoroastrianism. So that would mean Zoroastrianism would have been once their languages are divided, the Medes are kind of staying isolated for a while, whereas they all would have been speaking the same language before that. So once they start to be in their isolation, they start to form their distinct version of this religious belief system, which is probably the closest to the original, because you have overthrows and all kinds of mixing of religious stuff going in the Mesopotamian region while they're staying kind of isolated. So that seems to line up, again, very close. I mean, literally within 1 to 3 years of when I believe the Tower of Babel happened. Okay? I don't think history is that mysterious. I think when we get the flood, when we account the flood with our archaeology and we account the Tower of Babel in the right place, we find out that the world's not so crazy and distinct as we thought. Most of this is just the Tower of Babel. Okay? Over the next, from 1700 BC, you're going to talk about that's when the Jews go into Egypt. They come out around, I think it's like 1490. Okay, so you're looking at this is Joseph going into. Oh, I'm sorry. This is Joseph being born. So it's like 240, 250. It's not a long time that they're in Egypt. Okay, so they come out around 1490. Or that's when Moses takes them out of Egypt. They spend their 40 years in the wilderness, and that might be when Moses is born. I'm getting my details mixed up here, but it's during the 1400s they do their wandering in the wilderness, and then they come into the book of Joshua, which I'm covering as I'm teaching. I'm getting into the book of Judges right now. That's going to be my next later this week where I get into that. And then you're going to have the Book of Judges. We're finding a lot of stuff corresponding to the Book of Judges and the Book of Samuel in these Egyptian Amanra letters that are being discovered. So as this archaeological evidence keeps getting uncovered, and as people are putting their facts together, again, I'm just doing this. You can see how often I just use Wikipedia, okay? But like most of the authoritative stuff I'm getting on Zoroaster comes from this woman named Mary Boyce, who is at the School of London, who's the leading authority on Old Avestan and Zoroastrianism. She died in like '06, okay? So this information is coming to light as these, the internet's coming around and all this information is getting mixed very early on, and you still have all these academic anti-biblical biases in the universities, so they're not trying to put it together. You still have a lot of, quite frankly, your theological seminaries aren't focused on secular history that much. They're not trying to reconcile it. They're like, we don't know. They're the experts. They defer to them on scientific stuff, on historical stuff, on archaeological stuff. They're just scared to be wrong in the face of academics, because what they are is they're mystery cults. They're mystery cults who want their religion to seem credible, and so they're trying to reduce it to a philosophy like Greek philosophy so they can maintain their academic credibility in the world, and they're not trying to do what we should be doing, which is showing that the Bible is truth to the exclusion of all other things. Okay? But what I'm trying to do is weight the Bible and give it the authority it deserves and say, if it's true, then these dates should correspond, and I keep finding that they do. Okay? Again, the whole idea that the flood, or that the Tower of Babel dispersion happened through Peleg, or during the days of Peleg, seems to come expressly from Josephus and the Book of Jubilees, but the Book of Jubilees is also talking about this earlier division of the land under Noah, okay? And that's the division of the earth versus the division of the languages, okay? So if we're reading Genesis with some common sense, there wouldn't have been nearly enough people to be disobeying God by not dividing and spreading out among the nations, and having enough people to build a massive tower like they're saying they built, when Peleg is just like fourth generation, okay? You would have had under 1,000 people then. Why would God be like, okay, get out and spread away when there's only 1,000 people? It's not going to happen, okay? You're having God basically order that through Noah, and you're having Noah order that towards the end of his life, probably like 150 years shy of the end of his life. Okay, and by that time, you've had 250 years worth of people, which is enough for those three descendants to become in the hundreds of thousands at least, if not millions. Okay? So if you correspond those things and you just move the Tower of Babel to where it rightfully belongs, then we know why the Sumerian language doesn't match up with any other languages around it, because it was the OG language. Then we know why everyone is using cuneiform. They were using cuneiform until the Achaemenid dynasty. Okay? Why are they using cuneiform for so long? Because once the Tower of Babel happened, they were all trying to interpret this stuff, and they figured out what it meant in their own languages, and then they just, by the time it got there, it went from being, you remember you have monosyllabic languages, which are just one-syllable words, okay? And it goes from being pictographs to being monosyllabic tones, okay? Well, what are those? Well, those are different languages that are interpreting this and now using it to represent their monosyllabic tones, which Hebrew, Ab means father. It's one. The words are conjunctions of other words, and they go from monosyllabic to multiple syllable words being conjunctions of more words. So if you were to look at a 3-syllable word, that 3-syllable word has an etymological breakdown of probably 3 different words. And languages like Chinese just keep all the words separate. They don't form they don't form dual syllable words. Vietnamese doesn't do that either. I don't know about Korean and Japanese, but I know Chinese and Vietnamese do not, okay? Other languages are going to form words like we might hyphenate a word, and then eventually that word just becomes one word, okay? Well, if you understand that the original letters and symbols were pictographs, then you have people in their different languages reducing those pictographs to monosyllabic words, and then those monosyllabic words get put together to become multisyllable words, okay? So that's essentially what they're doing with cuneiform in their own languages, but their own languages are all different. Okay? That symbol becomes a different word in different language, and the biggest change, the biggest intersection of that is going to be in Mesopotamia, because that's where you have Semites, you have the Medes who are Japhethites, you have the Chaldeans who are Semites, and then you have the southern Mesopotamians who are Cushites. You have three different Hamites, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, all in an intersection right there, and their languages are the most widely different. Okay, where when God confused the languages, He confused them according to nations. Okay, He confused the languages according to nations, so people would primarily group according to the division that Noah ordained. Okay, because their languages are closer and they have a lot easier time understanding each other. And that's why you see primarily Europeans mixing, primarily Africans mixing, primarily Middle Easterners mixing. Okay. Obviously, you're going to have a big, wide difference as you get from, Japhethites are going to spread so far and wide, and from the Celts to the Chinese. But if you talk to a linguist or an etymologist, the Celtic language and the Chinese language are not that far apart. If you look at some of these, I had this language tree picture of all the Japhethite words for. This is all the primary Proto-Indo-European, so Japhethite languages. Okay, their word for mother. Okay, and they figured this out. This is why they've got this language tree. Okay. This is Proto-Indo-Iranian, okay, so think Eastern Iran to the people who conquered Ganges civilization. The word for mother is mata, okay? Sanskrit is mater. Old Persian is mata. Proto-Slavic, so these are going to be your languages for your Russians and Ukrainians and Belarus and stuff like that. Mati. Proto-Baltic Slavics is mate, mati. Proto-German is moder. Old Norse is modir, moder. Irish is madir. Latin is mater. Greek is mater. See, so you got mater, mater, mother, moder, mate, mate. See how close they are? And they all come from a word that was mater. Mater. Okay? And probably that has two different, there's probably two different words meaning. Mater. What does that mean? I don't know. But it seems to be the word matriculate, matrix, and all this stuff seems to be related to it. Well, matrix is the word for a womb, a woman's womb. Okay? So it seems to be the word for mother seems to be related to the word for whose womb I came out of. Okay? But you have matriculation seems to be, like when you go to a university, you hear people say my alma mater. Alma mater is literally the Hebrew word for virgin and the word for mother. So it's like you're being reborn through the university because you're taken away from your parents, and it's like a religious experience you're going through. The universities are based on mystery cults, and you're being reborn in a new image of these mystery priests, aka university professors, instead of your parents. Okay? So you matriculated from that university, and it's all related to motherhood, okay? But now look at these as you spread further on into modern times. You have Armenian, you have Meyer, Mitra. I wonder if Mithra is related to the word for mother. Mir, Mer, Madri, Madri, Mather, Mather, Mother, Moder, Mat, Matka, Majka, Mor, Madar, Mak, Moj, Ma, Mata, Ma. Okay? This is Bengali all the way over to Armenia. So a lot of them are much more closely related than we realize because these people groups were meant to be divided, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay? But this seems to be the basic division of things, and again, when we're getting into the Joshua book, we're now seeing Joshua come in, and it's going to majorly disrupt everything. So I'm going to try my best to pull in all the surrounding history as we're going through this, but they're going to majorly disrupt, all the predominant kingdoms, but they're also driving now some separation because these are Canaanites, they're not supposed to be here. These are Canaanites, they're not supposed to be here. These are Cushites, they're not supposed to be here. And who ends up taking over is the rightful Semitic peoples. So over here, you're going to have the Lydian kingdom emerge where the Hittites were. You're going to have the Assyrians emerge now that Canaan's gone. You're going to have the Aramaeans emerge now that they're gone, and you're going to have the Chaldeans emerge and become the Babylonian system. And then the Elamites are going to kind of emerge here, but they're eventually going to be taken over by the Medes and the Persians. Okay, but what you're having is basically the conquest of Joshua and Canaan allows for the different Semitic tribes to reemerge and reassert their dominance in the regions that were apportioned to them. Okay. Unfortunately, they should have all been very thankful to the Israelites for accomplishing them and their God for accomplishing this for them, but instead they were full of haterade and jealousy. So the Jews are going to keep getting sucked into the Canaanite religion, and we're going to get into that. And as we go through this, we're going to actually talk through the origins of these gods that these people worship and why. Okay. So hope you guys are blessed by this. Hope this gives you some context for that. Again, this stuff is going to eventually reach its final form in my book, Serpent by the Way. And that's going to take you from hopefully Noah's Flood to today with some overlay with the stuff that I'm doing with my Rightly Dividing book. So if you guys haven't gotten that book, the Rightly Dividing book, go ahead and get that on Amazon. It's gonna cover everything basically from the Christian period and Philo of Alexandria up to the present, where all the denominations come from. And then this one will take you through the intersection of all those things with all the other world's religions. So it's going to hopefully take us to the end times and see how this started out with a false prophet and Nimrod being, where's Nimrod? So we have an antichrist, a false prophet, and then when we get into Ashtra, she's the harlot. It doesn't look like I have a picture of her. Baal seems to be based on Yahweh. He's a ripoff of Yahweh, and it's not Yahweh, but it's based on Yahweh. And then Inanna or Ishtar or Ashtra is the OG harlot religion. And those three things are going to reemerge in the last days, and it looks like the false prophet is going to be from among the Jews. The Antichrist is going to be a Danite from among the Gentiles. And the harlot religion is going to be transhumanism and something having to do with robots and Sophia and Neom and stuff like that, okay? All things circular, they come back and they just repeat themselves because there's nothing new under the sun. But I hope you guys are blessed by this. Again, I'm going to try to dig in more on the Indian religions and the Egyptian religions, because those two and Zoroastrianism seem to dominate in terms of a religious philosophy forming versus just a bunch of gods and myths and legends. So hope you guys are blessed by this. Hope this makes sense to you, and have a great rest of your week. Batman out. Peace.
Peace, I'm out. I'm Batman.